She took my son. Daniel Moretti's voice dropped to a whisper so cold it silenced every man in the room. Clara Bennett took Leo, and every single person in this building knew she was planning to run. He turned slowly, looking at each face. Which means one of you helped her. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. A 4-year-old boy was gone on Christmas Eve, and the most dangerous man in New York was standing in the middle of his empty nursery, holding a small red ornament Leo had made at daycare, the only thing left behind. If this story already has your heart racing, you are exactly where you belong. Subscribe to our channel, hit the notification bell, and follow this story all the way to the end. Because what Daniel discovers about Clara, about his son, and about himself will change everything you think you know about power and love. And drop a comment telling us what city you are watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The nursery was exactly 32 steps from Daniel Moretti's office. He knew because he had counted them the night Leo was born. He had stood in the doorway of that room and counted the steps between himself and the most important thing he had ever been responsible for, and the number 32 had lodged itself in his mind like a prayer. 32 steps. Close enough to hear him cry. Close enough to reach him in seconds if anything went wrong. He had spent 4 years believing 32 steps was close enough. He had been wrong. Marcus Chen, his head of security, and the man who had served the Moretti family for 11 years, stood just inside the doorway of the nursery, with his hands at his sides and his jaw locked tight. He had delivered bad news to Daniel Moretti before. He had delivered the news of contract failures, of betrayals, of deaths. He had stood in this man's presence and said things that broke other men just to witness. But he had never in 11 years felt his hands shake the way they were shaking right now. When? Daniel said. He was not looking at Marcus. He was looking at the empty bed. Leo's blanket was folded at the foot of it, which meant someone had taken time. Someone had not grabbed the boy in panic. Someone had tucked the blanket, straightened the pillow, and left the room the way a caregiver would leave it after a nap. "We believe sometime between 2 and 4 this afternoon," Marcus said. The afternoon shift logged her entering with Leo for his nap at 2:15. When Rodriguez checked at 4:30 for the pre-dinner routine, the room was empty. 2 hours. Daniel turned the red ornament over in his hands. It was a circle of dried clay painted in messy strokes with a crooked star pressed into the center and Leo's handprint on the back. The daycare teacher had sent it home 3 days ago. Leo had carried it around the house like a treasure. She had a 2-hour head start. Yes. And nobody thought to check before 4:30. Marcus did not answer because there was no answer that would make that fact any less catastrophic. Daniel finally looked up. He looked at the 14 men crowded in the hallway beyond the nursery door, all of them standing at varying degrees of attention, all of them watching him with the particular combination of fear and loyalty that his presence had always commanded. Security personnel, household staff. 2 of his senior lieutenants who had been summoned from across the city the moment the alert went out. He studied their faces one at a time. "She did not do this alone," he said. "Clara Bennett has been in this house for 2 years. She knew the security rotation. She knew the camera blind spots. She knew which exit routes would give her the most time before anyone noticed." He paused. "She knew things that a caregiver does not learn by accident." The hallway went very still. "Which means someone told her." Daniel's voice stayed level. That was the thing people never understood about him. He did not raise his voice when he was at his most dangerous. He lowered it. "Someone in this house helped her map this building, helped her plan a route, helped her understand exactly how much time she would have." He looked at Marcus. "I want every person who had contact with Clara in the last 60 days sitting in the East Conference Room in 20 minutes. I want their phones. I want their schedules. I want to know every conversation they had with her that lasted longer than 30 seconds. "Yes, sir." "And Marcus." Daniel held up the clay ornament. "My son made this 3 days ago. He was happy when he brought it home. He was not afraid. He was not acting like a child who knew something was wrong." He set the ornament on Leo's pillow, with a gentleness that looked completely out of place on a man of his size and reputation. So, whatever Clara told him, she did not tell him he was running. She told him something else, something that made him want to go with her. He walked toward the door, and the men in the hallway parted around him the way water moves around stone. "Find out what that was," he said, "and find them." The East Conference Room of the Moretti estate was a room designed for decisions. Daniel had made hundreds of them in that room over the years. Business decisions, strategic decisions, the kind of decisions that reshaped portions of New York's underground economy with a single sentence. He sat at the head of the table now, with his jacket still on and his hands flat on the surface, and looked at the 8 people Marcus had assembled. 4 household staff, 2 security rotations, 1 of his personal assistants, and Vincent Caruso, his chief of operations, who had arrived with his collar open and his face carrying the expression of a man who had been pulled away from something important and was not entirely sure he deserved to be in this room. "Tell me about the last week," Daniel said. He was not speaking to anyone in particular. He was speaking to the room. "Someone start." Marta, the head housekeeper, who had been with the Moretti household for 9 years, folded her hands on the table and met his eyes without flinching. She was 63 years old and had outlasted 2 estate managers, 1 full security overhaul, and a complete restructuring of the household staff by being, as she put it, too stubborn to be replaced. "Clara was normal this week," Marta said. "Quiet, same as always. She took Leo to his music class on Tuesday. They baked cookies on Wednesday afternoon because Leo wanted to learn how. Thursday she had her regular afternoon off while Rodriguez covered Leo's nap schedule. Thursday." Daniel looked at Marcus. "That's when we think she made the drop," Marcus said. "Whatever she arranged off-site, she arranged it Thursday afternoon." "What do you know about where she went on her afternoons off?" Daniel asked Marta. "She usually went to the library. Sometimes she'd walk through the market near 84th Street. She bought Leo a book about penguins 2 weeks ago because he'd been asking about them." Marta paused. She was not a woman who seemed like she was planning anything. She seemed like a woman who was exactly where she wanted to be. "That's what made her dangerous," Daniel said, almost to himself. He looked at the security logs Marcus had placed in front of him. The camera footage had been reviewed. Clara had left with Leo through the East Garden entrance at 2:47 in the afternoon, which was well within the window of a normal afternoon walk. She had Leo in his winter coat, his green one with the hood he liked, because it had small barriers on top. She was carrying his small backpack, which she did routinely on their walks, because he liked to bring a juice box and a snack. Nothing unusual, except she had not come back. And when Daniel's team reviewed the footage from the past 3 weeks, they found something that made Marcus's expression go very flat and professional in the way it did when he was working hard not to show what he was feeling. "She walked a different route every day," Marcus said, pulling up a map on the screen at the end of the room. "For 6 weeks, every walk she took with Leo, she varied the route by small increments. Never the same pattern twice in a row. At the time, the team logged it as inconsistency, nothing suspicious. In retrospect, she was learning the neighborhood," Daniel said. "She was finding the gaps." "Yes." Daniel looked at the map for a long moment. "She planned this for at least 6 weeks, possibly longer. And not one person in this security team noticed that a woman was systematically mapping our exit routes while taking a 4-year-old for a walk." The room was silent in the particular way that rooms go silent when everyone present understands that silence is the only safe response. Daniel stood up. "I want every contact she ever gave us investigated by morning. Her references, her previous employers, every address she listed on her application." He looked at Vincent. "And I want to know if she was in contact with anyone outside this household. Anyone who would have a reason to want Leo gone or a reason to want information about our operations." Vincent nodded, but something in his expression shifted in a way that was so small it would have been invisible to anyone not paying close attention. Daniel paid close attention to everything. "Something you want to say, Vincent?" "No, sir." "You sure about that?" "I'm sure." Daniel held his gaze for 3 seconds longer than was comfortable. "Then get to work." The investigation moved fast because Daniel Moretti's resources moved fast when he directed them toward a single purpose. By 9 o'clock that night, his team had pulled Clara Bennett's background file apart down to its structural roots, and what they found was both more and less than anyone expected. Her real name was Clara Bennett. That part was true. Born 31 years ago in a small town in Vermont, raised by her grandmother after her parents died in a car accident. When she was 9, graduated with a nursing degree from a state university, worked for 3 years in home care before being hired through an agency to assist Isabella Moretti in the final year of her illness. Everything about her background checked out because they had checked it thoroughly 2 years ago when they first brought her on. What they had not checked because it had not seemed relevant at the time was what happened in the weeks after Isabella died. She didn't go back to the agency. Marcus reported sitting across from Daniel in the study. The agency thought she'd taken a position in Boston. We thought she'd gone back to the agency. There was a 2-week gap where no one was actually tracking her movements. 2 weeks, Daniel said. In those 2 weeks, she appears to have opened 3 separate bank accounts in different names, rented a post office box in New Jersey, and made contact with someone in a legal office in Connecticut. Daniel leaned forward. What kind of legal office? Family law, specifically a lawyer who handles cases involving child welfare and custody disputes. Marcus set a folder on the desk. She was building a paper trail, sir. She was documenting things about Leo's living situation in this household. She had been documenting it for months before Isabella died. The words landed like something physical. Daniel sat back. He picked up his glass, looked at it, put it down without drinking. She thought I was going to hurt him, he said. She thought the environment was harmful, Marcus said carefully. The documentation focuses on Leo's exposure to stress, lack of normal childhood socialization, restricted interaction with children his own age. She noted the security protocols as concerning from a child development standpoint. He paused. She made a case, sir. A quiet case assembled over time. She was not acting impulsively when she left today. She was executing a plan she had been building since before Isabella was gone. Daniel stared at the wall. He thought about Leo's face on Tuesday when he came home from music class. The boy had been singing something tuneless and completely unrecognizable in the back of the car. And when Daniel had asked him what song it was, Leo had said it was one he made up himself, and then looked at his father with an expression that was pure, uncomplicated hope, the hope that his father would think the made-up song was good. Daniel had nodded. He had said, "That's fine, Leo." Not, "That's wonderful." Not, "Sing it again." Not, "I love that you made something." That's fine. He closed his eyes for 2 seconds. Is the lawyer still practicing in Connecticut? Yes, sir. I want a conversation with him by morning. He won't speak to you voluntarily. People rarely do things voluntarily when there's enough incentive involved. Daniel stood. But I'm not going through the lawyer first. The lawyer is the end of a chain. I want the beginning. He picked up the folder. Where did Clara go after those 2 weeks? Where is the first address she used under a different name? Marcus hesitated. Tell me. We're still tracing the earliest address, but we found something else. Marcus pulled out a single photograph printed from a traffic camera image, grainy but clear enough. This is from a gas station camera in Pennsylvania dated 19 months ago. Clara and Leo getting fuel. Daniel looked at the photograph. Leo was standing beside a car that was not from the Moretti fleet, wearing a jacket Daniel did not recognize, eating something from a small paper bag. He looked fine. He looked better than fine. He was laughing at something outside the camera's frame, his whole body tipping forward the way small children lean into joy. Clara was watching him with an expression Daniel had not been expecting. Not the careful, professional attention of a caregiver, something older than that. Something that lived in the part of a person's face that they cannot control. She loved him. She was not pretending. She was not performing. She was standing at a gas station in Pennsylvania, watching a child she had helped raise, and her face was carrying the full, unguarded weight of someone who would walk through fire for the person they were looking at. Daniel set the photograph down. How long ago did Isabella make her this promise? he asked. Marcus was quiet. I know there was a promise, Daniel said. Isabella would not have trusted Leo to anyone she hadn't made a promise with, and Clara would not have risked everything she risked without believing she was keeping one. He looked up. Find out what Isabella told her. What Isabella told her was in a letter. They found it at 11:30 that night, inside a file that Clara had uploaded to a secure cloud account, a file she had apparently intended for the Connecticut lawyer if things went wrong. The file contained the documentation Marcus had mentioned, along with photographs, developmental records, and at the very bottom a scanned copy of a handwritten letter. Daniel read it alone. He had asked everyone to leave the study before Marcus handed him the tablet. He had not explained why, and no one had asked. The letter was in Isabella's handwriting. He would have known it anywhere, the slightly tilted capital letters, the way her H always looked more like an M, the particular loop on her Y that she had developed in high school and never corrected because her own mother had written the same way. My dear Clara, if you're reading this without me, then what I feared has happened, and I am so sorry for what I'm about to ask you to carry. Daniel is not a bad man. I need you to understand that before anything else. He loves Leo in the only way he knows how, which is the same way he loves everything, by trying to make it safe by building walls around it, by treating it like something that could be lost at any moment. The problem is that Leo is not a possession. He is a person, and Daniel doesn't know how to love a person without also trying to own them. I've watched Leo in this house. I've watched him learn to be quiet when his father is working. I've watched him stop bringing Daniel his drawings because Daniel looks at them the way he looks at reports briefly and then sets them aside. Leo is 4 years old, and he has already started learning that his joy is inconvenient. I cannot let that be his childhood. What I'm asking you is the hardest thing I've ever asked anyone. I'm asking you to watch him. And if you see what I'm afraid you'll see, if you see him disappearing inside himself, I'm asking you to do whatever you have to do to give him back his life. You know Daniel. You know what whatever you have to do might mean. I'm asking you anyway, because you're the only person who will love him without wanting anything from him. You're the only person in this family's world who is strong enough to choose Leo over everything else. Please, give my boy a childhood. With all my love, Isabella. Daniel read the letter twice. Then he set the tablet on the desk and sat in silence for a very long time. When Marcus knocked and came back in, Daniel was still in the same position, leaning forward, elbows on the desk, hands folded, staring at a point somewhere beyond the far wall. Sir, Marcus said quietly. She kept her promise, Daniel said. Sir, Clara. He did not look up. Isabella asked her to protect Leo. She kept that promise for 2 years. 19 months on the run, hiding from us, building a life in whatever town she chose, making sure Leo had music classes and cooking lessons and a penguin book and a jacket his father didn't pick out. His voice did not break, but it came close. She gave my son a childhood. Marcus stood very still. Find them, Daniel said. Not to bring them back by force, just find them. He finally looked up, and his expression was something Marcus had never seen on Daniel Moretti's face before. It looked like grief and resolve, and something that might in a few hours, or a few days, become a different kind of understanding. I need to talk to her, that's all. I just need to talk to her. Yes, sir, we're close. The trace on her accounts is almost complete. We think she's somewhere in the northeast smaller town within 2 or 3 hours of the city. Why northeast? Because she knows New York. She understands how our networks extend south and west. If she wanted to stay inside a range where Leo could potentially access the city for things like medical care or legal proceedings, but stay outside our typical search radius northeast, makes sense. Daniel nodded slowly. She thought about everything. She did. She's smart. Very. He stood and straightened his jacket, which was something he did when he was committing to a course of action, a small physical ritual that the people around him had learned to read as a signal. Then we'll have to be smarter, he said. But carefully. If she hears we're getting close and she runs again, we lose more time and Leo is displaced again. We need to know exactly where they are before we move." He picked up the tablet with Isabella's letter still on the screen. "And when we get there, I'm going alone." Marcus opened his mouth. "Alone," Daniel repeated. "With a driver, no security detail, no weapons visible, no approach that looks like what she's afraid it's going to look like." He set the tablet down. "She ran because she thought I would take him and put him back in a cage. I'm not going to walk up to her door looking like a cage. With respect, sir, if there's someone inside this organization who helped her plan this, that same person may be monitoring what we're—" "Then find that person before I leave," Daniel said. "You have until morning." The trace completed at 3:47 in the morning. Marcus came to Daniel's office where Daniel had been sitting since midnight, working through files, rereading the documentation Clara had assembled with the methodical attention of someone trying to understand an argument made against them in a language they spoke but had never expected to have aimed at themselves. "Carver Falls," Marcus said. "Small town in upstate New York about 3 hours north. Population under 6,000. She's been there for just over a year, renting a house on the east side of town under the name Claire Anderson." He set a printed photograph on the desk. "Neighbors describe her as quiet, pleasant works. Remotely, we think she's doing some kind of administrative work online. Leo is enrolled in a preschool there under the name Leo Anderson." Daniel looked at the photograph. It was the house. Small white wreath on the door, a string of lights along the porch railing that were probably Leo's doing because the lights were not evenly spaced and were clearly hung by someone who found the process exciting rather than tidy. "One more thing," Marcus said, and his voice carried a careful weight. "Tell me, the person who helped her." Marcus laid a second folder on the desk thinner than the others. "We found the communication trail. Encrypted messages through a third-party app going back 8 months. She had an inside contact who was feeding her information about our search patterns, letting her know when we were getting close, when to shift her digital footprint." Daniel looked at the folder without opening it. "Who?" Marcus was quiet for a moment. Daniel opened the folder himself. He looked at the name for a long time. Then he closed it, and he put it in his jacket pocket, and he stood up from behind the desk for the first time in hours. "Get the car," he said. "Sir, it's nearly 4 in the morning. Carver Falls is 3 hours away. If we leave now, we'll arrive just before sunrise on Christmas Eve morning." Daniel buttoned his jacket. "Which is exactly when I want to arrive." He paused at the door. "Because if my son has been celebrating Christmas properly for the last 2 years, he's probably going to be up early. And I want the first thing he sees when he looks out the window to be his father standing in the snow." Marcus looked at him for a long moment. "And Clara." Daniel picked up the clay ornament from where he had placed it on the corner of his desk. He looked at the crooked star, at the small handprint on the back, at the name Leo pressed unevenly into the clay along the bottom edge. "Clara kept a promise my wife made her keep," he said. "The least I can do is show up without an army." He walked out of the office. Outside, the city was dark and cold, and somewhere 3 hours north, a woman who had given up everything to keep a promise was probably asleep in a small rented house with a string of unevenly hung Christmas lights on the porch and a 4-year-old boy dreaming about the morning. Daniel Moretti, who had spent 4 years building a fortress around his grief, got into the car and drove toward the thing he had been trying to protect while accidentally destroying it, the simple, irreplaceable fact of his son's happiness. The folder in his jacket pocket pressed against his ribs with every breath. He knew whose name was in it. He had not decided yet what he was going to do about that. But he had decided one thing sitting in his study at 4 in the morning, reading his dead wife's handwriting on a scanned piece of paper. He was going to hear Clara Bennett's side of this story. All of it. And he was going to listen. Whatever came after that, whatever decisions had to be made about the man who had helped her, about the future of Leo's life, about the crumbling distance between Daniel Moretti's power and Daniel Moretti's heart. Whatever came after that would wait. Tonight first, then everything else. The car moved through the empty streets north toward the dark and the cold and the small white house with the crooked lights. And Daniel held the clay ornament in his hand the whole way, pressing his thumb gently against his son's small, perfect handprint, feeling the outline of it like a compass, pointing him toward the only direction that had ever mattered. The town of Carver Falls did not wake up the way New York woke up. There was no grinding of delivery trucks, no sirens threading through the dark, no collective noise of a city pulling itself back to consciousness after a few hours of restless sleep. Carver Falls woke up slowly in small pieces, a porch light switching on here, a dog barking twice and going quiet there, the particular stillness of a place that had not yet been asked to carry the weight of the day. Daniel noticed all of it. He had grown up in noise. He had built an empire in noise. Silence for most of his adult life had meant something was wrong. But as the car moved through the empty streets of Carver Falls at 10 minutes before 7 in the morning on Christmas Eve, he found himself doing something he hadn't done in longer than he could clearly remember. He was just looking, not calculating, not assessing, not building a mental map of entry and exit points and potential vulnerabilities. Just looking at a quiet town in the early morning of a holiday and feeling something that he didn't immediately have a name for settle in his chest like warm water. "There," the driver said quietly. Daniel saw the house. It was exactly as it had appeared in the photograph. Small, white, unremarkable, in the way that houses are unremarkable when they belong to people who are trying not to be found. The wreath on the door, the porch railing with its uneven string of lights still lit at this hour. Either Clara had forgotten to turn them off last night, or Leo had turned them back on this morning because he wanted to see them as soon as he woke up. Daniel was betting on Leo. "Pull over here," he said. "Not in front. Give me room." The driver pulled to the curb half a block away and cut the engine, and Daniel sat for a moment in the silence and looked at the house and thought about what he was going to say when Clara Bennett opened that door. He had been composing versions of that conversation for the entire 3-hour drive. Versions that were controlled and measured, versions that acknowledged the complexity of the situation, versions that opened with an apology or a question or a simple statement of fact. He had constructed arguments and dismantled them. He had thought about what Clara would expect him to say, the threats, the demands, the assertion of his rights as Leo's father, and he had methodically set all of that aside, because none of it mattered yet. What mattered was the next 30 seconds when he knocked on that door and Clara looked through the peephole or the window and saw his face and made a decision about whether to run again or stand her ground. He got out of the car. The cold hit him immediately sharp and clean in a way that New York air never was, and he stood on the sidewalk for a moment in his dark coat with his hands at his sides, breathing it in. Somewhere inside the house, he could hear barely at this distance, but definitely a child's voice. High bright going up at the end of a sentence the way Leo's voice always did when he was asking a question. Daniel walked toward the house. He did not hurry. He kept his hands visible out of his pockets, relaxed. He climbed the 3 porch steps and stood at the door and raised his hand and knocked twice. Not hard. Not the knock of a man who was owed entry. The knock of someone who understood that the person on the other side had a right to decide what happened next. The child's voice inside stopped. He heard footsteps, then a long pause, and he knew she was looking through the peephole, and he held himself very still and let her look and did not reach for the door and did not speak. The lock clicked once, then again. Then the door opened. Clara Bennett looked exactly like the woman in the gas station photograph, and nothing like the woman he had employed. That version of Clara, the one who had moved quietly through his household, careful and unobtrusive, and always just slightly to the side of any room she entered, had been a performance. He understood that now. He had been looking at a woman playing a role, and he hadn't seen it because he hadn't been paying attention to anything except whether the role was being performed adequately. The woman standing in the doorway was not performing anything. She was scared. He could see it clearly, the controlled steadiness of her breathing, the way her right hand was gripping the edge of the door, the color that had gone out of her face the moment she confirmed it was him. But she was not running. She was not closing the door. She was standing in it, blocking the space between him and whatever was inside, and looking at him with an expression that was equal parts terror and something he recognized from Isabella's letter. Resolve. Daniel, she said. Clara. He kept his voice quiet, quiet enough that it wouldn't carry to a child who might be around a corner or at the top of a staircase. I'm alone. There's a driver half a block away, and that's everything I brought. He kept his eyes on hers. I read Isabella's letter. She went very still. I read all of it, he said, every word, and I drove 3 hours in the middle of the night because I needed to stand in front of you and say that out loud so you could hear it from me directly. He paused. I'm not here to take him from you. I'm here to understand. Clara stared at him for a long moment. Her hand tightened on the door. He could see her working through it, the calculation, the probability, the weighing of whether the man in front of her was telling the truth or saying what she needed to hear in order to lower her guard. You've never been here just to understand anything, she said. I know. You've always been here to control the outcome. I know that too. So why should I believe this is different? Daniel reached into his coat pocket. Clara's body tensed immediately, both hands moving to the door, and he moved slowly, deliberately, telegraphing every inch of the motion, and pulled out the clay ornament. Leo's ornament. The dried clay circle with the crooked star and the handprint and the uneven letters pressed into the bottom edge. He held it up between them. Clara looked at it. Something in her face cracked open just slightly, in the way that faces crack when they encounter something they weren't prepared for. He made this 3 days ago, Daniel said. He was proud of it. He carried it around the house, and I said, he stopped. He looked at the ornament. I said, that's fine, Leo. That's what I said. He lowered his hand. I drove 3 hours to tell you that I understand why you left. I don't agree with how you did it, but I understand why. Clara was looking at him now with an expression he didn't know what to do with, because it was not what he had been expecting. He had been prepared for anger, for accusation, for the kind of cold refusal that came from a person who had spent 19 months reinforcing their position. He had not been prepared for the way she was looking at him, which was the way someone looks when they are trying to decide if what they're seeing is real. Daddy? The word came from inside the house, small and certain and completely uncomplicated, and Daniel felt it move through him like electricity. He looked past Clara's shoulder. Leo was standing at the hallway wearing pajamas with small blue stars printed on them, holding a stuffed animal that Daniel did not recognize. A penguin he realized from the book Clara had bought him, and looking at his father with an expression of pure open-mouthed surprise that was about 2 seconds away from becoming something else entirely. Clara turned. Leo, sweetheart, sweetheart. Daddy. Leo dropped the penguin and launched himself forward with the particular reckless velocity of a 4-year-old who has not yet learned to modulate the force of his emotions. And Daniel crouched down fast on the porch steps and caught him, and Leo crashed into him hard enough to nearly knock them both over his arms, going around Daniel's neck, his whole body vibrating with an excitement that had no room in it for any of the complicated things the adults around him were feeling. Daddy, you're here. Mama said she didn't say, why are you here? It's Christmas Eve. Did you come for Christmas? Are you staying? Did you bring... Hey. Daniel held him, just held him both arms around the small, warm, squirming weight of his son and pressed his face into Leo's hair and did not say anything for a moment because he could not. Leo kept talking. He had always been a talker, which was something Daniel had logged as background information rather than understanding as the particular gift. It was the gift of a child who felt safe enough to fill the air around himself with his own thoughts. I made a penguin with Mama, Leo said into Daniel's shoulder, the word slightly muffled. His name is Captain, and we made cookies yesterday. We made them with Mama. What was the thing we put on them? Sprinkles, Clara said. Her voice had gone rough. Sprinkles. Leo pulled back to look at Daniel's face, both his small hands on Daniel's cheeks, in the unself-conscious way of children who haven't yet learned that faces are private. There were red ones and green ones, and also some gold ones, but those kind of fell off. Are you staying, Daddy? Can you stay? Daniel looked at his son's face. The upturned nose, the serious brown eyes that were all Isabella, the slight gap in his front teeth because he'd lost one 3 weeks ago. How did Daniel know that? Because Marcus had put it in a daily report. He had read about his son losing a baby tooth in a security briefing. "I'm staying for today," he said. Leo's face went bright as anything. "Yes." He scrambled down and retrieved the penguin from just inside the doorway with the focused urgency of someone who needed to make immediate introductions. "This is Captain. He's a king penguin. They live in Antarctica and they don't fly, but Mama says they're good at swimming really fast." "King penguins," Daniel said. "That's serious business." "Very serious." Leo held Captain out for inspection with great solemnity. Daniel looked at the penguin. Then he looked up at Clara, who was still standing in the doorway watching him hold a plush penguin with an expression on her face that he could not entirely read. Careful still, guarded. But the door was open, and she had not moved to close it. "Clara," he said, "can we talk?" She looked at him for another long moment. Then she stepped back and held the door open. "Leo," she said, "will you go get Captain's hat? He's going to get cold if you take him outside without it." Leo considered this with great seriousness, decided it was correct, and disappeared back into the house at the same velocity he'd arrived. Daniel stood up and stepped through the door. The inside of the house was small and warm and full of the kind of comfortable clutter that accumulates when someone is actually living somewhere rather than maintaining an address. A bookshelf in the hallway with children's books doubled up on every shelf. A low hook by the door with Leo's green coat, his bear ear hood coat from the Moretti house, so she'd brought that much of his old life hanging next to a woman's coat and a small pair of snow boots. A drawing taped to the wall at Leo's eye-level crayon on white paper depicting 3 figures that were identifiably a woman, a child, and a very large penguin. Daniel looked at the drawing. The 2 human figures were holding hands. "He drew that last week," Clara said from behind him. She had moved to the kitchen and was standing by the counter with her arms crossed, watching him look at her walls. "He's been very into family portraits lately. He does a new one every few days." "He's good," Daniel said. "He practices constantly. I have 47 of them in a folder upstairs." Daniel turned to look at her. "You kept all of them." "Of course I kept all of them." She said it simply without defensiveness, because for Clara, there was apparently no other reasonable response to that sentence. He pulled the folder from his jacket pocket. Not the one with the name in it, that one was still in his inner pocket pressing against his ribs. This was the folder with Isabella's letter, the document Marcus had printed for him on the way out of the house. He set it on the kitchen table. Clara looked at it. She did not touch it. "How did you find it?" she asked. "You uploaded it to a cloud account," he said. "The security team found the account when they traced your digital trail. I expected that eventually. You expected us to find it, and you still uploaded it." "Yes." "Why?" She looked at him steadily. "Because if something happened to me, I needed someone to know why I did what I did. I needed there to be a record. Not a legal document, just the truth in Isabella's own words, in a place where it could be found." Daniel pulled out a chair and sat down at the kitchen table, because he felt suddenly that this conversation was going to require something more grounded than standing in her hallway. "You were protecting yourself. I was protecting Leo. There's a difference." She sat down across from him, keeping the table between them. "If something happened to me, and he ended up back in that house without any explanation of why I'd taken him, without any record of what Isabella asked me to do, he would have grown up believing his caregiver kidnapped him. That I was a criminal. That the woman who spent 2 years raising him was a monster who took him away from his father." She paused. "I couldn't let that be the story he grew up with." Daniel stared at the folder. "What would you have done if he started asking for me, if he'd wanted to come home? He asked for you constantly in the first 6 months." The words hit him hard. He hadn't expected that. He had told himself in the car that Leo had probably adapted quickly, that children were resilient, that 4-year-olds lived so completely in the present that the past became abstract quickly. He had been wrong. "What did you tell him?" "I told him the truth," Clara said. "I told him his daddy loved him very much and that he was working very hard and that he would see him again. Her jaw tightened. I said it every time he asked, which in the first 2 months was approximately 17 times a day. Daniel said nothing. He stopped asking as often after the first 6 months. Not because he stopped missing you, because he started understanding that some things you have to hold on to inside instead of saying out loud. And that broke my heart more than the asking did. She met his eyes. He learned to be quiet about the things that hurt him, Daniel. He learned that at 4 years old. He learned it from watching you. I know. Do you? I'm starting to. She studied him. That's not the answer I expected. What answer did you expect? Something about legal rights. Something about how what I did was criminal. Something about what you were going to do to me now that you'd found us. She paused. Something that sounded like you. I read Isabella's letter, he said again. The whole thing. Not just the parts about Leo, all of it. He looked at his hands on the table. She knew me very well. She loved you very much, Clara said. Which meant she saw all of you, not just the parts that were easy to love. Did she talk to you about me after she got sick? Clara was quiet for a moment. Yes. What did she say? She said you were the most capable person she had ever known, and the least comfortable person she had ever loved. She said it without cruelty, the way a person states a fact they have had a long time to come to terms with. She said you showed love by solving problems, and that when you couldn't solve a problem, you built a wall around it instead of sitting with it. She looked at him. She said the hardest thing about being sick wasn't being sick. It was watching you try to solve her. Daniel looked at the table for a long time. I couldn't solve it, he said. No. And after she died, Leo became the problem you were going to solve correctly this time, Clara said. I know, I saw it happening. That's why I started keeping records. From the back of the house came the sound of Leo's footsteps, and his voice conducting some kind of conversation with Captain the Penguin about the hat's location and whether it had possibly been left in the bathroom. Daniel and Clara both listened to it for a moment without speaking, and the sound of Leo narrating his search filled the small kitchen with the particular ordinary magic of a child who had been allowed to become himself. He talks to everything, Daniel said. Everything. The penguin, the plants, the car. He told the microwave last week that it needed to be patient because the macaroni wasn't ready yet. Daniel laughed. It was small and surprised and completely genuine, and Clara looked at him when it happened with an expression he didn't try to interpret. He was quieter in New York, Daniel said. Yes. I thought that meant he was calm. It meant he was careful. The word fell between them like a stone. Daniel reached into his inner pocket and pulled out the second folder, the one with the name in it. He set it on the table next to Isabella's letter and pushed it toward Clara. She looked at it. She opened it slowly with the careful attention of someone who expects to recognize what's inside, but is not entirely prepared for how it will feel to see it confirmed. She looked at the name. She closed the folder. How long have you known? Daniel asked. 3 months, Clara said. Her voice was very even. One of the messages came through the wrong channel, an error on his end. I saw the sender tag before it rerouted. She pushed the folder back across the table toward Daniel. I told him I hadn't seen it. I don't think he believed me. Daniel went still. You've known for 3 months that someone inside my organization was feeding information to both of us, and you didn't. What was I supposed to do? She asked. Call you? She looked at him. I was living under a different name with your son in upstate New York. I could not call you. I could not send a message through any channel. I wasn't certain was secure, because the only person I knew was compromised was the same person who controlled a significant portion of your information security infrastructure. She paused. I did what I could. I started moving us again. Smaller footprint. Different accounts. I was 3 weeks away from relocating when you... She stopped. When I found you. Yes. Daniel opened the folder again and looked at the name. Vincent Caruso. his chief of operations. 11 years. A man who had sat in the East conference room last night with his collar open and an expression on his face that Daniel had read correctly and then allowed himself to doubt. "Why?" he asked. "I don't know his full reasoning," Clara said. "But the information he gave me was always about your search patterns, not about Leo specifically. He wasn't protecting Leo. He was using me." She held Daniel's gaze. "I think he saw my disappearance as an opportunity. Leo being gone created uncertainty about the succession. Uncertainty about the succession created space for someone with ambition to position himself. He wanted me looking for Leo instead of looking at him. For almost 2 years it worked." Daniel closed the folder. He sat with that for a moment, the particular cold clarity of understanding that the man who had helped Clara stay hidden had not done it out of compassion for a child or loyalty to Isabella's memory. He had done it because a missing heir was a useful distraction. Because Daniel Moretti, consumed with grief and searching, was a Daniel Moretti not paying attention to the structures of power shifting beneath his feet. "He didn't expect me to find you," Daniel said. "No, I think he expected the search to continue indefinitely, or for me to eventually be found under circumstances he controlled. Either way, he maintained leverage." She looked at the folder. "When he realized you'd found the trace last night, he must have—" Daniel's phone vibrated in his pocket. He pulled it out. "Marcus." He answered. "He, sir," Marcus said, and his voice had the flat, careful tone of someone delivering something they wish they did not have to deliver. "Vincent Caruso left the property at 4:15 this morning. His security credentials were used to access the operations server at 3:48. We found it on a system review 20 minutes ago. He pulled a significant amount of data before he left. Client files, operational records, security protocols. How much? Enough to be problematic. Enough that wherever he's going, he's not going empty-handed." Daniel looked at Clara across the table. She was watching his face and reading it the way people learn to read faces when they have spent a long time in proximity to powerful, dangerous people. Not the words, but the underneath of the words, the thing the expression says before the voice has caught up to it. "He knows where we are," Daniel said. It was not a question. If he accessed the trace report before he pulled the data, yes, he would know the address. Daniel stood up. "How long?" "Unknown. He had a 90-minute head start on the data pull, and we don't know when he left the city. If he drove, he could already be in Carver Falls." A pause. "Yes, sir." Daniel ended the call and looked at Clara and said with a steadiness that he was choosing very deliberately because the alternative was not useful. "We have a problem." Clara did not look surprised. She looked like a woman who has spent 19 months understanding that problems arrive on their own schedule with no regard for what else you have going on. "Vincent," she said. "He pulled files before he ran. He knows this address." Clara stood. She did not reach for her phone or her coat or move toward the door. She moved toward the hallway, toward the sound of Leo still narrating his search for Captain's hat, and she stood at the edge of the kitchen doorway and looked at him for a moment, with an expression that was uncomplicated and absolute. Then she turned back to Daniel. "Tell me what you need," she said. Daniel looked at her. The woman who had spent 2 years running, who had mapped her exits before she ever stopped moving. Who had spent 19 months alone with his son in a town that didn't know her real name, turned and looked at him and asked what he needed. He had not expected that. He had expected to be the one with the plan. He had expected to walk into this house and take control of the situation, the way he took control of every situation, with resources and strategy, and the weight of his own authority. He had not expected to be standing in a small kitchen in Carver Falls at 7 in the morning with a woman asking what he needed from her. "I need to know if you have a way out of this house that isn't the front door," he said. "Yes, I need to know if Leo has what he needs for at least 48 hours. There's a bag. It's always packed." She said it without apology or explanation, because packing a bag was something she did the same way she kept records and varied her routes, which was simply the way a person who understood what she was living in took care of the things she was responsible for. It's been packed since we moved here. Good. He pulled out his phone again and called Marcus back. I need the Carver Falls address locked down. Discreet, I do not want a visible presence in this neighborhood. And I need someone to find Vincent Caruso's vehicle before he gets off the highway. We're already running his plates, Marcus said. We have eyes on the 3 main routes north. If he's coming. He's coming. He wouldn't have pulled those files if he was going somewhere else. This is his play. He doesn't want me to have what I found out here. He doesn't want me to walk away from this house with a clear picture. Daniel walked toward the window and looked out at the quiet street and the uneven Christmas lights and the snow that had started falling in the last hour, soft and steady. He's coming to finish what he started 2 years ago. There was a silence on the line. Sir, Marcus said carefully, what exactly did he start 2 years ago? Daniel thought about Leo's face. The carefully quiet face of a boy who had learned to hold his hurt inside. The bright open face of a boy who had learned in a different house with a woman who kept promises that his joy was not inconvenient. He wanted Leo out of the picture, Daniel said. Not gone, just removable, placed somewhere that could be used as leverage. Clara's disappearance was perfect for him because it did 2 things. It gave him 2 years of access while I was distracted searching. And it left Leo in a situation where if Vincent ever needed to use the child as a bargaining chip. He stopped. The thought arrived complete, the way the worst thoughts always do, all at once and entirely clear. He turned to look at Clara. She was already looking at him. He helped me disappear, she said quietly. He made sure my escape route worked. He made sure the digital trail was good enough to keep you searching, but not good enough to find me too quickly. She paused. I thought he was helping me because of Isabella. He and Isabella were close. He was at the hospital with her in the last weeks. I thought, he used Isabella's death, Daniel said. He used your love for Leo and your promise to Isabella, and he built a situation that served him perfectly for 2 years. You thought you were protecting Leo from me. He was using you to protect himself from consequences. Clara's jaw tightened. He told me there were people in your organization who wanted Leo dead. Daniel went very still. He told me that if I stayed, if Leo grew up in that house and became the Moretti heir on schedule, there were men inside your network who would eventually move against him. He gave me names. He said he had intelligence about a specific threat. She looked at Daniel. He said the only way to keep Leo safe was to get him out. And you believed him. He had documentation, she said. He showed me files, photographs, messages. Her voice hardened. I believed him because Isabella was 3 weeks in the ground and I was 31 years old, and I had just promised a dying woman that I would protect her child, and a senior member of the most powerful crime family in New York handed me evidence that the danger was real. She met his eyes. What would you have done? Daniel did not answer because the honest answer was that he would have done exactly what she did if someone had given him the same information and aimed it at the only thing he couldn't afford to lose. The files he gave you, he said. Do you still have them? Yes, copies. Everything he gave me is in a folder upstairs with everything else I've been keeping. I need to see them. I know. Clara. He held her gaze. I need you to understand something. Whatever those files contain, whoever he implicated, I'm going to verify it. Every piece of it. And if there are genuine threats in my organization beyond Vincent, I need to find them. I know, she said again. I've been waiting for this conversation for 19 months. From the hallway, Leo appeared triumphantly, captain's hat in hand, penguin pressed against his chest. I found it. It was in the bathroom. Mama, you were right, I did leave it there. Captain says thank you for the help. He looked between Daniel and Clara with the particular observational sharpness of a child who has learned to read adult faces for information, and something in the atmosphere of the kitchen clearly registered because his expression shifted slightly toward careful. Are you okay? He asked. He was asking both of them. He turned the question from one face to the other with equal focus. We're okay, Clara said, and her voice was warm and certain and gave away nothing of the fear underneath it. Yeah, He studied her. Then he studied Daniel. "Yeah," Daniel said. Leo considered them for another moment, with his head tilted, doing the calculation that 4-year-olds do when they sense something unspoken but have not yet developed the language for what it is. Then he appeared to decide that the answer was sufficient, because he pressed Captain's hat firmly onto the penguin's head and looked up at Daniel. "Do you like penguins?" he asked. "I'm developing an appreciation," Daniel said. "Good, because we're going to talk about them a lot." Leo pulled out a chair at the kitchen table, Clara's chair, the one she had just vacated, and climbed into it, and arranged Captain formally on the table in front of him. "Mama says king penguins share the egg. Both parents. They take turns." He looked at Daniel very directly. "That's good parenting." Daniel looked at his son. Then he looked at Clara, who had turned back to the counter, so he couldn't fully see her face, but her shoulders were doing something he recognized from the gas station photograph, the particular movement of someone who is feeling something they hadn't given themselves permission to feel. "Yeah," Daniel said, looking back at Leo. "That's good parenting." His phone vibrated again. He answered without looking away from his son's face. "Sir," Marcus said. "We have a visual on Caruso's vehicle. He's on Route 9 40 minutes out, and he's not alone." Daniel set his hand on the kitchen table, steadying himself against something that was not quite surprise. "How many?" "2 vehicles. We count 4 people." He looked at Leo, who was explaining something to Captain the Penguin in a serious undertone. He looked at Clara's back, at the set of her shoulders, at the woman who had spent 2 years making sure this child got to be a child. "Then we have 40 minutes, Daniel said quietly. "Use them." 40 minutes. Daniel had built an empire on his ability to compress time, to take a situation that looked like chaos, and reduce it inside his own mind to a series of decisions arranged in order of urgency. He had done it in boardrooms, and in back alleys, in hospitals, and in warehouses, in every version of a moment that required someone to think clearly while everything around them was falling apart. He did it now. "Marcus," he said, keeping his voice low enough that Leo, still conducting his penguin briefing at the kitchen table, would not hear the edge in it. "I need the 2 vehicles stopped before they reach the town limits. Not violently. A road obstruction, a tire problem, anything that costs us 20 minutes without creating a scene. We can do that. There's a construction detour on Route 9 that we can extend by about 15 minutes with the right call. Do it. And I need 2 of our people inside this town positioned near this street but not visible. No weapons drawn. If this goes sideways, I want options, not a firefight on a residential street on Christmas Eve." "Understood, sir." Marcus hesitated in a way that told Daniel there was something else. "The files Vincent pulled from the operations server. We've been doing a preliminary inventory. Some of what he took goes back further than 2 years. There are records in there that predate his involvement in operations, personnel files, financial structures. He's been building this for longer than I thought. Significantly longer." Daniel looked at Clara, who had turned around from the counter and was watching him, with her arms crossed, and her eyes reading every word he wasn't saying. "How long, Marcus?" "Our best guess right now is 5 years, maybe 6. 5 years. Which meant Vincent Caruso had been positioning himself for succession since before Isabella got sick, since before Leo was old enough to walk. He had been sitting at Daniel Moretti's right hand for 11 years, building loyalty and access and trust, and for at least 6 of those years, he had been building a parallel architecture underneath it, something that could support his weight when he was ready to step onto it. Clara's disappearance with Leo had not been an opportunity he stumbled onto. It had been a move he planned for. "Get it done," Daniel said. 20 minutes. He ended the call. Leo looked up from the table. Captain the Penguin was now seated upright, facing the room with an air of formal authority. "Who were you talking to?" "Someone who works with me." "Are they coming for Christmas?" "No, bud. They're helping with something else." Leo accepted this with the trust of a child who has learned that adult business happens around him and is not usually about him. He returned to Captain. Daniel moved to where Clara was standing and lowered his voice further. "The files Vincent gave you. I need them now. They're upstairs. She turned toward the hallway. Clara. She stopped. He said it quietly, carefully, the way he was learning in real time in this kitchen, through this conversation, to say things that mattered. I need you to know something. Before we look at whatever's in those files. Before any of this goes where it's going. He paused. Whatever Vincent told you, whatever he showed you, that made you believe Leo was in danger from my organization. He used your love for my son to manipulate you. That doesn't make what you did wrong. You acted on the best information you had to protect a child you had promised to protect. He held her gaze. I am not going to make you pay for that. Clara looked at him for a moment. Then she said, he told me there were 2 men in your inner circle who had discussed it. He had an audio recording. He played it for me. Her voice was steady, but her hands weren't. It sounded real, Daniel. Men I recognized by voice discussing whether Leo surviving to adulthood was an obstacle. Those were the words they used. An obstacle. Who were the voices? He said one was your financial director, a man named Soto. Soto's been with me since the beginning. I know, that's why I believed it. She looked at the folder in his hands. The recording is in the file. You'll hear it. She turned toward the stairs. I'll get everything. She went up, and Daniel stood in the kitchen with his son and listened to Leo explain to Captain the Penguin that Christmas Eve was different from Christmas Day because Christmas Eve was about waiting and Christmas Day was about arriving, and you had to understand the difference or you'd be disappointed. Daniel listened to his son's philosophy of holidays and thought about a man he had trusted for 11 years, sitting in a recording studio or a back room somewhere, creating a piece of audio that would send a grieving caregiver running with a child in the night. He thought about Isabella in the last weeks of her life, trusting that same man with her bedside visits, with her private conversations, with the particular vulnerability of someone who is dying and has let her guard down with the people she believes are safe. He thought about what it meant to be the kind of man who could sit with a dying woman and simultaneously use her death as the first move in a long game. The anger came quietly. Not the hot anger of surprise which he had felt standing in the empty nursery last night. This was the colder variety, the kind that sits beneath the surface and does not announce itself until it is needed. Clara came back downstairs with a manila folder that was thick enough to suggest months of careful accumulation. She set it on the kitchen table and put her hand flat on it and looked at Daniel. There are things in here that I didn't fully understand when I gathered them, she said. I copied everything he gave me and then I kept adding things afterward, things I observed things. Leo said things I heard in conversations I wasn't supposed to hear in the last few weeks before I left. She lifted her hand. Some of it may not make sense until you put it next to what you already know. Daniel opened the folder. The audio file was there on a thumb drive, paper-clipped to the front page. The documents behind it were organized with the careful precision of a woman who had spent 2 years unable to act on information and had therefore organized it until she could each page dated each item labeled in small, controlled handwriting. He picked up the thumb drive first. I need something to play this on, he said. Clara pulled a small laptop from the counter drawer. The kind of deliberately ordinary laptop a person buys when they are trying not to stand out, and set it on the table and opened it. Leo, she said, can you go check if Captain needs his scarf too? It's very cold today. Leo looked at the Penguin with genuine concern. I didn't think about a scarf. He slid off the chair. I'll be right back. Captain, don't worry. He disappeared. Clara plugged in the thumb drive. The audio began. Daniel stood very still and listened to 2 voices he recognized having a conversation about his son's life, as though it were a line item on a budget review. The first voice was Soto's, or something constructed to sound exactly like Soto's, with the particular rhythmic cadence of the man's speech, the slightly formal vowels that reflected his education. The second voice he did not recognize, and that detail registered separately as important, because Vincent had told Clara the second man was from the inner circle. But the second voice was not someone Daniel had ever heard in any conference room or on any call. The conversation lasted 4 minutes. By the end of it, Daniel had heard his son referred to as the obstacle 4 times and a liability twice. He pulled out the thumb drive and set it on the table. "The Soto voice," he said. "It's a construction. The rhythm is right, but the vowels are wrong under stress. Soto flattens his vowels when he's uncomfortable. This voice doesn't." He looked at Clara. "He built you a fake recording." Clara stared at him. "A convincing one," Daniel said. "Whoever did the audio work was skilled, but it's not Soto." He picked up the thumb drive again. "Which means Vincent spent money on this. Significant money. This isn't something you build on a casual budget." He looked at her. "He needed you to run, Clara. He needed you scared enough to run." "Why?" she said. And then before he could answer, "No, I understand why. He needed you searching. He needed you consuming resources and attention on a missing child instead of watching him build a power base inside my own organization for 6 years," Daniel said. They looked at each other across the kitchen table. "He didn't count on you finding Isabella's letter," Clara said slowly. "He didn't know about the letter. Isabella wrote it privately. She hid it with documents she gave you directly." Daniel shook his head. He knew about the promise because Isabella trusted him enough to mention it. But he didn't know what the letter contained. He assumed the promise was informal, a verbal commitment from a caregiver that could be dismissed easily in a legal context. He paused. "He assumed that if I ever found you, I would come here angry, that you would be on the legal defensive, that the situation would be complicated enough to keep me occupied while his phone vibrated. He grabbed it. "Sir?" Marcus's voice was tight. "The construction detour bought us 12 minutes. First vehicle is past it, 7 minutes out." 7 minutes. Daniel closed the folder and looked at Clara. "We need to move Leo." "Where?" "Is there somewhere in this town that you trust? Someone who doesn't know your real name, but who Leo is comfortable with?" Clara thought for exactly 3 seconds. "Mrs. Henley. She lives 4 houses down. She watches Leo when I have to do errands. He loves her. She has 3 cats and a bird feeder, and she makes him hot chocolate with exactly the right amount of marshmallows, which Leo has described to me in detail on multiple occasions. Can you call her right now and ask if Leo can come for an hour without explaining why? She won't need an explanation. She'll just say yes." "Call her." Clara reached for her phone. Leo came back down the stairs with Captain now wrapped in a small knitted scarf in addition to the hat, looking satisfied with himself. He stopped when he saw the expressions on both adult faces, and his own expression went cautious. "Are we going somewhere?" he asked. "You are," Daniel said, and crouched to Leo's eye level. A movement he was discovering required him to leave behind a significant amount of the physical authority he had spent years curating, and that leaving it behind felt surprisingly uncomplicated when the person he was looking at was his son. "You're going to visit Mrs. Henley for a little while." Leo's face went through a series of rapid calculations. With Captain should absolutely come. Is Mama coming? Mama and I need to take care of something first. We'll be at Mrs. Henley's to get you in a little while. Leo looked at him for a long moment. Then he looked at Clara, who had put the phone to her ear and turned slightly away. Then he looked back at Daniel. "Is it bad?" he asked. The directness of it, the simple, clear-eyed 4-year-old directness of a child asking an adult to tell him the truth, hit Daniel somewhere he didn't have good defenses for. "There's something we have to handle," Daniel said carefully. "But you are safe. And Mama is safe. And I'm here." Leo considered this. "You promise?" "I promise." His son looked at him for a beat longer than was comfortable the way children do when they're deciding whether an adult's word is worth its weight. Then he pressed his lips together and nodded in a way that looked remarkably like a decision rather than just acceptance. "Okay," he said. "But Captain's not leaving. He comes with me." "Non-negotiable," Daniel agreed. Clara finished the call. She's expecting him. She looked at Daniel, and something passed between them that was not words, but was nonetheless perfectly clear, the shared understanding of two people who are about to face something difficult and have somewhere in the last 40 minutes arrived at the same side of it. She took Leo's hand and walked him down the street. Daniel watched them go. He stood at the edge of the porch and watched his son walk 4 houses down, explaining something to Captain the Penguin in an animated undertone, his small green coat with the bare ear hood making him easy to track even as the snow came down a little harder. Then he went back inside. He had 6 minutes. He called Marcus. "When the vehicles stop, I want to know Vincent's position before anyone approaches. I need to talk to him. Not a takedown, not a confrontation, a conversation. He came here because he has a plan, and I want to know what the plan is before I shut it down." "Sir, if he's armed." Vincent doesn't get violent himself. He has never been that kind of operator. He builds and he manipulates and he sends other people to do the physical work. Daniel moved through the small house with purpose. The men with him are the muscle. They're there because he expected to find me gone and Clara alone and Leo accessible. A pause. "He didn't know you were here. He found out I'd found the location, but he pulled the files before the trace report completed. He knew the town, maybe the street, but he didn't know I'd arrived before him." Daniel checked his watch. "He's going to pull up expecting a woman alone with a child. He's going to find me." That changes his calculation significantly. That's the point. He looked out the front window at the quiet street. "When he gets out of that vehicle and sees me standing here, I want to know exactly which way his face goes, because the direction it goes will tell me everything I don't already know." 5 minutes passed, then 4. Clara came back through the door at the 2-minute mark, slightly breathless without Leo. She looked at Daniel and said, "He's fine. Mrs. Henley has him making paper snowflakes. He asked if he could show me some when we come to get him." "We will," Daniel said. She nodded. She looked around the small kitchen and then looked at Daniel and said, "You should know something before they get here." She crossed her arms, which he had learned in the last hour was not a defensive posture for her, but a steadying one, the physical equivalent of taking a breath. "Vincent reached out to me last week." Daniel went still. "I told you I thought he knew I'd seen the sender tag 3 months ago," she said. "Last week confirmed it. He sent a message through the old channel, the one I stopped using, saying that things were changing inside your organization and that my situation might need to be revisited. That there might be a better arrangement possible." She met Daniel's eyes. He didn't say what arrangement. But the timing combined with the fact that you'd apparently been getting closer to finding us. "He was warning you that I was coming," Daniel said slowly. "Because if you ran before I found you, you'd be running scared and he'd still have a way to use you and Leo as leverage. Or he was offering me protection if I handed him something. What could you hand him? You." She said it simply. "I've been living in hiding from Daniel Moretti for 19 months. If I contacted law enforcement, if I made a formal statement about Leo's living conditions, about the nature of the Moretti household, I could have created legal complications for you that would have taken years to untangle." She looked at him directly. "He wanted me to do that. He was positioning it as a way to keep Leo safe from you. But really, it would have kept me occupied with legal defense while he moved," Daniel said. "Yes." "Did you respond to his message?" "No." "Why not?" Clara was quiet for a moment. "Because by that point, I had been watching Leo ask about you every day for a year. Because I had been reading him books about penguins and helping him make paper snowflakes, and listening to him make up songs, and underneath all of it every single day, there was a question he stopped asking out loud, but never stopped asking in every other way." She looked at the floor for a moment, then back up. He wanted his father. Not the father he remembered from New York, who looked at him the way people look at things they're afraid to break. He wanted the father he'd invented in his imagination, the one who had time, who listened, who thought his songs were worth hearing. She met Daniel's eyes. "I couldn't give him that. And I started to wonder if you could if someone gave you the right information. If someone showed you what you were actually doing." Daniel said nothing. Isabella believed you could change, Clara said. She said that in the letter. She didn't say you were a bad father. She said you were a father who didn't know yet what being a father actually meant. And she asked me to protect Leo until you figured it out. She paused. I just didn't expect figuring it out to take 2 years and require me to disappear across state lines. Something that might have been a laugh moved through Daniel before he got hold of it. It came out wrong anyway. Not quite humor, not quite grief, somewhere between the two, where things live that have been held together for a long time. I'm working on it, he said. I can see that. Outside, a car door closed. Daniel moved to the front of the house without being obvious about it, and he looked out through the window at the street, and he saw Vincent Caruso standing on the sidewalk in front of the house in a coat that was too expensive for the setting, looking at the front door with the expression of a man who has arrived somewhere he planned to arrive and is doing his first environmental assessment. Then Vincent's gaze moved slightly left and found Daniel's car parked half a block away, and his whole body changed. The calculation showed on his face. The slight adjustment of the shoulders. The eyes moving quickly to the house, and then back to the car, and then briefly, just for a half second, to the man behind him who was one of the 2 vehicles Marcus had counted. Then the front door opened, because Daniel opened it, and they looked at each other across the snowy yard of a small rented house in Carver Falls on Christmas Eve morning. Vincent Caruso had a face made for trust. That had always been true. Even featured mild, the kind of face that looked patient in a crowd and reasonable in a conflict, and that had for 11 years been one of Daniel Moretti's most valuable assets precisely because it inspired confidence in people who were meeting him for the first time. Clients, partners, adversaries brought to the table, they looked at Vincent and relaxed. He was not relaxing now. Daniel, he said. Vincent? Daniel stayed where he was in the doorway, hands in his pockets, looking at his chief of operations with a steadiness that he had found over the years to be more effective than anger. Anger told people you were reactive. Steadiness told them you had already done the calculation and you were waiting for them to catch up. You drove 3 hours on Christmas Eve. I heard you'd found them, Vincent said. I was worried. Worried, Daniel repeated. About your safety. About Leo. About the situation. He moved slightly toward the yard, not rushing, keeping it conversational. The 2 men behind him stayed at the vehicle, which told Daniel they had instructions for this scenario. You came alone, Daniel, to a situation you didn't fully understand. I've been monitoring the search. I wanted to make sure you had backup if you needed it. That's why you pulled the operational files, Daniel said. A very small pause. Precautionary transfer, given the uncertainty. Vincent. Daniel said it quietly. Just the name. The way he had said names for 11 years, when he wanted someone to understand that the conversation they were currently attempting was not the conversation they were going to have. Vincent stopped. He looked at Daniel. Something in his face shifted, and what it shifted toward was not guilt exactly, but a kind of professional reassessment, the expression of a chess player who has discovered that several moves ago the board was not what he thought it was. How long have you known? He asked. Since last night, Daniel said, when you couldn't hold your face in the conference room. I held my face. You held most of it. Daniel tilted his head slightly. You've always been better at patience than performance. The performance is where you show the seams. Vincent's jaw tightened very slightly. Come inside, Daniel said. Daniel, come inside, Vincent. Leave your people at the car. Come inside and talk to me the way you've talked to me for 11 years. He stepped back from the doorway. You want to tell me something. You've been building toward telling me something for years. This is the moment. Come inside and say it. A long pause. Then Vincent Caruso walked across the snowy yard and up the porch steps and through the front door of a small house in Carver Falls, and Daniel closed the door behind him. Clara was standing in the kitchen doorway. Vincent looked at her, and something moved across his face that was more complicated than Daniel had expected. Not just the calculation of a man reassessing his position, but something older. Something that looked briefly and inconveniently like regret. Clara, he said. "Vincent," she said, "you didn't run." "No." He looked at her for a moment. "You should have run. I know that's what you expected me to do. I expected you to run because I know you." He said it with something that sounded almost like admiration. "I know how you think. I know you've been running contingency plans since the day you moved into that house with Leo. I expected you to see Daniel arrive and move the boy and disappear before I got here." "You expected me to run," she said, "because that's what I would have done 6 months ago." She met his eyes. "It's not what I'm going to do now." Vincent looked at Daniel. "She's changed." "People do," Daniel said, "when they're allowed to." Vincent moved to the kitchen table and sat down unbidden with the ease of a man who has spent 11 years sitting at tables in rooms controlled by Daniel Moretti and has learned to make himself comfortable. He looked at the manila folder. He looked at the thumb drive. He looked at Isabella's letter in its folder, and something in his face went very still. "You found the letter," he said. "Yes. Did you find the original or the copy?" Daniel looked at him. "There's an original." "Isabella gave me a copy to keep," Vincent said. "She trusted me with a copy. She said—" He stopped. He pressed his lips together. "She said she wanted someone who understood Daniel to have it, in case." He looked at the table. "In case you needed someone to show it to you." Clara made a sound that was not quite a word. "She trusted you," Daniel said. "Yes. And you used her trust." "I used everything available to me," Vincent said. He said it without apology, but also without pride, in the flat tone of a man who has rehearsed this accounting for a long time and is now delivering it. "I built this organization next to you for 11 years. I made it work. I kept people in line who you didn't have time to manage. I solved problems you never knew existed. I built loyalty with your lieutenants that was in many cases stronger than their loyalty to you because I was available and you were—" He paused. "Not. And you decided you deserved more than a chief of operations salary." "I decided," Vincent said, "that if something happened to you, the organization would survive because I'd built it to survive. And I decided that a child heir who would need 15 years to be groomed and the entire structure to be maintained in a holding pattern was inefficient. So you manufactured a reason for Leo to disappear. I found a reason that was already there." He looked at Clara. She was already worried about the boy. The documentation she was building was real. Her concern was genuine. All I did was give her better intelligence about why the concern was urgent. He paused. "The recording was constructed. I'll admit that. But the underlying truth wasn't fabricated. There were men in your organization who saw Leo as an inconvenience. Not a mortal threat. An inconvenience. I amplified that into something actionable. You used a grieving woman and a dead woman's words to manufacture a crisis," Daniel said. "I created a situation where everyone got what they wanted," Vincent said. "Leo got a normal life. You got a reason to focus on the organization instead of being consumed by custody management. I got operational freedom." He looked at Daniel steadily. "It worked for 2 years. It worked for 2 years, Daniel said, because you built it on a lie, and lies require maintenance. They require feeding. They require you to keep manipulating the people inside them, and eventually the cost of the maintenance exceeds whatever you were gaining." Vincent was quiet. "What was the plan for today?" Daniel asked. "You drove up here with 2 men. You pulled 6 years of operational files. You were coming here because you finding them changed the calculation," Vincent said. He said it simply without theater. "If you arrived here angry and took Leo back by force, the situation went back to what it was. You obsessed I operated. But Marcus's report, the one you read last night, I saw it before I pulled the files. You weren't coming up here angry." He looked at Daniel with something that was the closest thing to honest expression Daniel had seen on his face since they walked in. "You were coming up here to listen. And a Daniel Moretti who listens to Clara Bennett is a completely different problem than a Daniel Moretti who's still searching for his son. Because a Daniel Moretti who listens to Clara Bennett finds out about you." "Yes," And what were you going to do when you got here? Take Leo. I was going to make you a different offer, Vincent said. One that didn't require Leo to be a complication. What offer? A clean division, Vincent said. The organization splits. You take the legitimate holdings, they're substantial. They'd sustain you. I take the operational structure. Leo grows up civilian off the board entirely. No succession pressure, no threat, no target. Clara keeps him. He looked at Daniel and then at Clara. Everyone walks away. The kitchen was very quiet. And the files you pulled, Daniel said. Insurance. Not leverage insurance. In case you said no and decided to come at me with everything you had, I needed enough documentation to make that decision costly for you. Daniel looked at the man who had sat at his right hand for 11 years and delivered this explanation with the same even competence that he had delivered every other operational briefing, and he felt the full weight of what a sustained betrayal actually looked like. Not dramatic, not theatrical, just clean and functional and organized like everything Vincent Caruso did. No, Daniel said. Vincent looked at him. No to the offer, no to the division, no to the insurance arrangement. Daniel held his gaze. You built what you built using my resources, my infrastructure, my trust, and 11 years of being inside my house. None of that is yours to divide. He paused. What I'm going to do is dismantle what you've built, restore the structure, and let the organization understand very clearly what the consequences are for the kind of construction you've been doing. That's going to cost you more than the split would. Probably. People are loyal to me, Daniel. Genuinely loyal. If you come at this as a purge, you lose a third of your operational capacity. Then I rebuild with people who are loyal to the right things, Daniel said. And I take the reduced capacity. Vincent studied him. You've changed. I've been told that's possible. Not in 2 days, not even in 2 years. Vincent was looking at him with an expression that was despite everything professional and almost respectful. What changed you? Daniel looked toward the hallway, the direction of Mrs. Henley's house 4 doors down, where a 4-year-old was making paper snowflakes and explaining penguin facts to a woman who didn't know his real name. I went looking for my son, Daniel said, and found out what I'd been giving him. Outside, Marcus's team moved. The 2 men at the vehicle were approached with the quiet efficiency that Marcus had refined over many years of doing things that needed to be done without creating spectacles. No shots, no raised voices. Just 2 men who had come to a quiet town on Christmas Eve and found themselves suddenly involved in a conversation they hadn't planned for. Vincent heard it, the subtle shift in sound, the absence of footsteps he'd been peripherally aware of. His jaw tightened once, which was the only concession he made to the fact that the last exit from his plan had just closed. The files, he said. We'll discuss the files, Daniel said. Everything you took gets returned. Every operation you built parallel to mine gets documented and wound down properly, because I am not going to damage the people inside those structures who had no idea what they were actually supporting. He kept his eyes on Vincent. And then you're going to help me clean up what you made because you understand it better than anyone, and because the alternative is something neither of us wants. Vincent said nothing for a long moment. Clara had not moved from the kitchen doorway. She had been standing there for the entire conversation with her arms at her sides not crossed, listening with the particular quality of attention she brought to everything, not passive, but processing, filing, understanding. He's not going to disappear, she said to Vincent. Vincent looked at her. That's what you're calculating right now, she said. Whether it's worth cooperating or whether the outcome is the same either way. Whether Daniel keeping his word is more probable than Daniel doing what the Daniel you know would actually do. She tilted her head slightly. He kept Isabella's letter in his jacket pocket the whole drive up here. He brought Leo's ornament. He came here alone. She paused. Figure out which Daniel you're looking at. The kitchen held its breath. Vincent Caruso, who had spent 6 years building an architecture of patient deception, looked at the woman who had spent 2 years making paper snowflakes and reading penguin books and keeping a promise, and he made a decision that had the quality of a door closing rather than opening. "All right," he said. He put his hands on the table flat, in the gesture of a man laying down something he'd been carrying too long. "I'll document it. Everything. The parallel structure, the personnel, the financial flows. All of it." "Starting today," Daniel said. "Starting today." Daniel looked at him for one more moment. Then he turned toward the hallway. "Clara." She looked at him. "Go get Leo," he said. "Tell him we're coming to see the snowflakes." Something in her face shifted. Not dramatically. Not with the weight of a resolution or the brightness of relief, but with the particular quietness of a woman who has been braced for a long time and is feeling very carefully what it might be like to stop. She picked up her coat. She walked out. Daniel stood in the kitchen with the man who had tried to dismantle his family, and he thought about 32 steps and a small handprint in clay and a boy explaining to a penguin that Christmas Eve was about waiting and Christmas Day was about arriving. He understood for the first time what his son had been trying to say. The waiting was over. Mrs. Henley's house smelled like cinnamon and old books, and the particular warmth of a home that had been lived in by someone who understood what living was actually for. Clara noticed all of it the moment she stepped through the door, the way you notice things your body has been missing before your mind has had time to name them. She had been running on adrenaline since 7 in the morning, since the moment she looked through the peephole and found Daniel Moretti standing on her porch in the snow with his hands out of his pockets, and something in his face that was not what she had spent 19 months preparing herself to see. She had prepared for anger. She had prepared for authority and demand, and the particular cold efficiency of a man who had decided the outcome before he knocked on the door. She had not prepared for the clay ornament. Leo was sitting at Mrs. Henley's kitchen table, with paper and scissors, and a look of absolute concentration on his face. His tongue pressed to the corner of his lip, the way it always went when he was doing something that required precision. He had a circle of folded paper in front of him, and he was cutting a small triangle from the edge with the focused care of a surgeon. Mrs. Henley, 71 years old, silver-haired, the kind of woman who had arrived at a place in her life where she said exactly what she meant and found the world much simpler, as a result, was sitting across from him with her own piece of paper, watching him work with an expression of genuine investment. "There she is," Mrs. Henley said, looking up at Clara. "He's been at it since you left, haven't moved once." "Almost," Leo said without looking up. "Almost. It has to be even or it won't open right." He made one more cut very carefully and then set down the scissors and unfolded the paper with the slow reverence of someone opening something they have made with intention. The snowflake was not perfect. It had one arm slightly longer than the others and a small accidental tear near the center where the scissors had gone a fraction too deep. But it was unmistakably a snowflake, recognizable and deliberate, and made by small hands that had been trying very hard. Leo held it up and looked at it. "It's good," he announced. "It's beautiful," Mrs. Henley said. Leo looked at Clara and held it up higher. "Mama, look." Clara crossed the room and crouched down to his level and looked at the snowflake and felt something move through her chest that had been compressed for 19 months, trying to fit inside the space available to a woman who was always one bad decision away from losing everything. "It's perfect," she said. "It has a tear. That's what makes it yours." Leo considered this for a moment and then accepted it with the pragmatic grace of a child who has learned to trust that the people who love him mean what they say. He put the snowflake down on the table and looked at her face more carefully the way he had been doing since Daniel arrived, that quick calibrating scan that he had learned too young and that Clara both understood and grieved in equal measure. "Is everything okay now?" he asked. She thought about Vincent Caruso sitting at her kitchen table with his hands flat on the surface and his architecture of deception finally laid out in the open where it could be seen. She thought about Marcus's team moving quietly outside. She thought about Daniel, standing in her kitchen, with his son's ornament in his coat pocket, and his dead wife's letter in his hands, reading both of them like a man who had finally decided to understand the language he'd been refusing to learn. "Yes," she said. Everything's okay." Leo nodded once with the seriousness of someone receiving a report rather than reassurance. "Daddy's still there. He's waiting for us." "Okay." Leo picked up the snowflake again, held it to the light from the window. "I'm going to show him this one. And then we should make more. We need enough for the whole house." He looked at Mrs. Henley. "How many do you think the whole house needs?" "At least 20, Mrs. Henley said without hesitation. Leo's eyes went wide with the scale of the project. "We should start now." "We have time," Clara said. And for the first time in a very long time, she meant it. They walked back to the house together, Clara and Leo and Captain the Penguin, who had graduated to being carried under Leo's arm in a way that suggested official escort rather than stuffed animal transport. Leo talked the entire four-house distance, which was normal, but today the talking had a different quality to it. He was narrating. He was constructing the story of the morning in real time, working through the sequence of events with the particular verbal processing that children do when they have absorbed something significant and need to organize it into something they can carry. "First Daddy was here," Leo said, "and then I went to Mrs. Henley's and made snowflakes, and now we're going back and Daddy is still there, which is different from before when Daddy was never there when I came back from somewhere." Clara said, "You noticed that?" "I notice a lot of things," Leo said with the mild confidence of someone stating an established fact. "I know you do. Daddy used to be there when I fell asleep, but not when I woke up," he said. "Or there when I woke up, but not when I got home. He was never in both places at the same time." He looked up at her. "Today he was there when I woke up, and he's still going to be there when I get back." Clara looked at the top of her son's head. She could not stop thinking of him that way. Her son. The word that had no legal weight behind it, and all the actual weight in the world. And she thought about what it cost a child to keep that kind of accounting. To track the arrivals and absences of a parent with that precision. To have built at 4 years old a complete data set about the reliability of love. "He's working on it," she said. "Being in both places at the same time." "I know," Leo said. "I could tell." She looked at him. "How?" "He called me Bud," Leo said as though this were self-evident. "He used to call me Leo with the full name when something was wrong and nothing at all when he was too busy. But today he said Bud." He nodded decisively. "Bud is good." Clara had nothing to add to that because it was completely correct. They reached the house and Leo pushed through the front door with the energy of someone returning to a situation they have decided is good, and he went straight to the kitchen without breaking stride, Captain tucked under his arm. "Daddy," he announced, holding up the snowflake. "Look what I made." Daniel was sitting at the kitchen table. Vincent was gone. Marcus had collected him while Clara was at Mrs. Henley's, a process that had apparently been handled with enough quiet efficiency that the street showed no evidence of it whatsoever. The manila folder was still on the table. Isabella's letter was closed inside its folder beside it. Daniel had a cup of coffee that someone had made. Clara registered that he had found the coffee and the cups, and figured out the machine, and made himself at home in her kitchen, with a naturalness that surprised her, and then on reflection, didn't. He looked up when Leo came in, and his face did something that Clara had not seen it do once in 2 years of working in his household. It opened. Not the controlled warmth of a man performing fatherhood for the benefit of observers. Not the brief, managed attention of someone who has checked the box of acknowledging their child. His face actually opened the lines around his eyes, the set of his jaw, the careful authority that was his default expression. At all times, all of it simply moved aside to make room for the fact of his son walking into the room. He looked at the snowflake Leo was holding up. "You made that," he said. "At Mrs. Henley's. It has a tear, but Mama says that makes it mine." Leo set it on the table in front of Daniel with the gravity of someone presenting something of value. "You can have it." Daniel looked at it. He looked at it the way he had looked at the clay ornament, with an attention that was not about assessment or categorization, but was about actually seeing the thing in front of him. He picked it up carefully, the way you pick up something fragile and specific, and he held it up to the light the same way Leo had at Mrs. Henley's table. "It's good," he said. Leo beamed. "We need to make 20 more. Mrs. Henley says 20 is enough for a whole house. Then we'd better get started." Leo looked at him with an expression of electric surprise. "You're going to make them too? If you show me how." Leo looked at Clara with the expression of someone who has just received news that exceeds their most optimistic projection and needs a witness to confirm it's real. Clara nodded once. Leo turned back to his father with the focused energy of someone who has just been handed a project of great importance. "Okay," he said. "First you need to fold the paper, exactly in half. It has to be exact or the whole thing goes wrong." "Exactly in half," Daniel said. "I'll show you. Sit closer." Daniel moved his chair. Clara stood in the kitchen doorway and watched Daniel Moretti, the most feared man in New York's underground world, pull his chair closer to a 4-year-old who was about to teach him how to make a paper snowflake, and she felt something that she did not have a clean name for settle into the space in her chest that had been running on vigilance for 19 months. It felt like something ending. She wasn't entirely sure yet what came after. Marcus arrived an hour later after Leo had fallen asleep on the couch with Captain tucked under his chin and half a completed snowflake still on the coffee table in front of him. The sugar from the hot chocolate Mrs. Henley had sent home with them had carried him through 3 snowflakes and most of a 4th before the morning's emotional weight caught up with his body and pulled him under. Daniel covered him with the blanket from the back of the couch, the one that had Leo's initials on it in embroidered letters, because Clara had bought it at a craft fair 6 months ago from a woman who did custom work, and Leo had chosen the thread color himself and selected dark blue because he explained it was the color of serious things. Daniel stood looking at his sleeping son for a moment. Then he walked to the kitchen where Marcus was sitting across from Clara with a cup of coffee and the expression of a man who is holding several significant updates and waiting for the appropriate moment to deliver them. "Vincent," Daniel said, "in transit to the city. He's cooperating fully so far. He started the documentation in the car. We gave him a secure device, and he's been at it for the last 40 minutes. Marcus set a folder on the table thinner than Clara's, but dense with its own weight. "There's something you need to know before you read the full inventory of what he built. Tell me." The parallel structure is larger than we estimated from the files he pulled. He'd been running certain operations under subsidiary names that were clean enough on the surface to pass standard review. Some of those subsidiaries have contracts with legitimate businesses, real contracts, real services, real people who don't know the structure underneath. Marcus paused. Dismantling it isn't going to be simple. Some of it has to be wound down carefully, or it takes legitimate livelihoods with it. How many people? On the legitimate side, hundreds. Indirectly, potentially more. Daniel sat down. He put both hands on the table and looked at them for a moment. "He built himself into the walls," he said. "Yes, that was the design, not just financial leverage, structural integration. Remove him too fast, too hard, and you damage things that have nothing to do with him. Which means I need him functional and cooperative for longer than I'd like. Which means," Marcus said carefully, "that the situation has to be handled with more patience than the situation deserves." "Yes." Daniel looked at Clara. "Did you know the scope of what he'd built?" "I knew some of it," she said. "Not the subsidiaries, but I knew he was more embedded than he appeared to be." She wrapped her hands around her mug. "He told me once about a year into my being gone that the reason I was safe was because he'd made my continued freedom a structural necessity. He didn't explain what he meant, and I didn't ask." She looked at Daniel. "I should have asked." "You were surviving," Daniel said. "You were raising a 4-year-old in hiding. You did not have the bandwidth to audit my operations director." She looked at him when he said it. It was a simple sentence, factual and without ceremony, and it landed with the weight of something Clara had not realized she had been waiting to hear. Not absolution exactly, because she did not need absolution for protecting Leo. But acknowledgement. The acknowledgement that what she had been doing for 19 months was not simply a crime he was graciously overlooking, but a circumstance with a full complex truth inside it. "Thank you," she said. He looked at her. "For what?" "For saying it like that." He held her gaze for a moment. Then he looked at Marcus. "I need the winding down to start quietly and move carefully. No announcements. No sudden restructuring that looks like a purge to the people inside those subsidiaries. This gets done properly." "Understood. And I need Soto brought in this afternoon." He paused. Not because he's suspect, because he was implicated in that audio, and he deserves to know it and to have a chance to defend himself directly. Marcus nodded. "There's one more thing." He reached into the folder. Among the files Vincent pulled, there was a document we almost missed because it was embedded in a financial archive. It's a legal instrument. He slid it across the table. Isabella signed it 8 months before she died. Daniel looked at the document. Clara looked at it from across the table and felt something in her go very still. It was a notarized declaration. 2 pages formal, witnessed carrying the signature of a family law attorney in Connecticut, the same Connecticut attorney that Marcus had found in Clara's early background, traced the one she'd been in contact with in the weeks after Isabella died. But this was dated before that. 8 months before Isabella died, which meant 7 months before Clara had ever contacted that attorney herself, which meant Isabella had contacted him first. Daniel read it in silence. His face was completely unreadable, which Clara had learned was not the same as his being unaffected. It meant the opposite. He finished reading. He set the document down. "She filed for guardianship," he said. "Isabella filed a legal declaration naming Clara as Leo's secondary guardian. Contingent on—" He stopped. "Contingent on what?" Clara said. Daniel looked up at her. "On my being unable or unwilling to provide Leo with what the document calls an emotionally present and developmentally appropriate parental environment. Within the first 3 years after Isabella's death." He held her gaze. "She built you a legal framework, Clara. She didn't just write you a letter. She went to a lawyer 8 months before she died, and she built you a legal foundation to stand on." Clara stared at him. "She knew you might need it," he said quietly. "She knew you might run. She knew I might come after you. And she made sure that if it came to a legal fight, you would not be standing there as a kidnapper. You would be standing there as a secondary guardian acting within the scope of a documented legal instrument." "I didn't know about this," Clara said. "I know." "She never told me she—" "I know." He looked at the document again. "She gave the copy to Vincent, for safekeeping." He let that land. The silence in the kitchen was the specific kind that falls when everyone in a room has just understood simultaneously that a dead woman had been thinking several moves ahead of everyone, including the man who thought he had built a fortress around his own future, and the man who thought he had built a parallel empire inside it. Isabella Moretti had seen all of it coming, and she had spent the last 8 months of her life making sure the people she loved had what they needed to find their way through it. She trusted Vincent with this document, Daniel said, because she believed he was loyal to her. She didn't know what he was building. He set the document down. "He had this for 2 years, and he never showed it to me." "He didn't need to," Marcus said. "As long as you were searching and Clara was running, the document was irrelevant. The moment you found each other and the legal question became active, he was going to use it," Daniel said. "Not to protect Clara, to complicate the situation enough to give himself leverage." "Yes, sir." Daniel looked at the document for one more moment. Then he picked it up and turned to Clara and held it out to her. She took it. He said, "That's yours. It was always yours. She meant it for you." Clara looked at the 2 pages in her hands. At Isabella's signature on the second page, the same signature she had watched Isabella practice in the hospital, when her hands were trembling too much to write, normally refusing to let the tremor become an excuse not to do the things that needed doing. She folded the document carefully and held it against her chest. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now," Daniel said, "we figure out what comes next. Not today, not in the next hour. But I need to say something to you first. He looked at the table for a moment, and then looked up, and the expression on his face was not practiced or managed or constructed for effect. It was the expression of a man choosing in real time to say something he had not said to anyone in a very long time, because saying it required setting down something heavy. "I owe you an apology." Clara blinked. "Not for looking for Leo," he said quickly. "I'll never apologize for that. But for the house he was living in before you took him. For the childhood he wasn't having. For the things Isabella saw and wrote about, and the things you saw and documented, and the things that Leo shows every time he talks, the counting, the tracking, the way he files information about his father like someone building a safety case." He paused. "He learned to do that in my house. I taught him without meaning to. That love was something that showed up on a schedule, and that its absence was something to be tracked carefully." Clara said nothing because sometimes what a person says is complete and does not need anything added to it. "I'm not going to be different overnight," Daniel said. "I understand that. I'm not going to make promises about who I'm going to be in a year or 5 years, because I've made that kind of forward-looking promise before, and I know what it costs when you can't keep it." He looked at her steadily. "What I can tell you is what I know today, right now in this kitchen. I know my son is happy here. I know that you gave him that. I know that what Isabella asked you to do was the right thing, even if the way it happened was harder than it needed to be for both of us." He stopped. Clara waited. He said, "I'm not here to take him from you." The words fell into the kitchen like something physical. "What I'm asking," he said, "is whether you would consider coming back. Not to the house the way it was. Not to the role you had before. Something different. Something that doesn't require you to disappear yourself inside my household in order to be present in Leo's life." He paused. "I don't know exactly what that looks like yet, but I know what it doesn't look like. It doesn't look like you running. And it doesn't look like you existing in the margins of his life, because the legal and practical realities make it easier for everyone except Leo." Clara looked at him for a long time. The document was still pressed against her chest. "You're asking me to trust you," she said. "Yes. I've been afraid of you for 2 years. I know. Not because you're violent. You've never frightened me that way." She held his gaze. "Because you're certain. Because you make decisions and they become reality. Because the version of Leo's life that you would have built without interference was a version I could see clearly. And it was a version that would have been good by every measurable standard, and would have been terrible in every way that doesn't measure. I understand that now. Understanding it and changing it are different things." "Yes," he said. "They are." She looked at the document in her hands. She looked at the folder on the table, at the lamp Leo had left on in the living room, at the snowflake that Daniel had set carefully against the napkin holder so it wouldn't get crumpled. "He's asleep in there," she said. "I know. He's going to wake up and want to make more snowflakes. We need 14 more to reach 20. He's going to want to know if you're staying for dinner." Daniel was quiet for a moment. "Am I?" Clara looked at him. "Staying for dinner," he said. "Am I?" It was not a demand. It was not an assertion of right or authority, or the complicated weight of what he was owed as a father. It was a question simply asked by a man who had driven 3 hours in the dark and was sitting in a small kitchen in a town where nobody knew his name, holding a paper snowflake his son had given him. "You'd have to eat what we have," she said. "I wasn't planning for company." "I've eaten worse. Leo will want to eat in the living room because it's Christmas Eve and he thinks special days require different furniture arrangements. That seems reasonable. He'll also want to tell you every fact he knows about penguins before the night is over. There are a significant number of facts." "I have time," Daniel said, and the way he said it, quiet and direct, and without the particular heaviness of a man making a declaration, landed in Clara's chest with the precise weight of something she had not known she was waiting to hear. Not a promise about the future, not a guarantee of transformation. Just, "I have time." A man who had spent 4 years treating time as a resource to be allocated, telling a woman who had spent 2 years stealing time for his son that he had some left. She pulled out a chair and sat down. "Soto," she said. Daniel looked at her. What about him? When you bring him in this afternoon, he's going to be hurt. She folded her hands on the table. Not just about the recording, about the fact that the recording existed and you're only finding out now. He's been loyal to you for a long time, and he's going to feel like I should have been paying better attention, Daniel said. Like the system failed him in both directions. Vincent used his voice, and you didn't know. She paused. Be careful with how you tell him. Daniel looked at her. You're already thinking about Soto's feelings, he said. Someone has to. You've been managing the human dimension of my organization from upstate New York for 2 years. I've been thinking about the people I left behind, she said. That's different. Is it? She was quiet for a moment. Marta, she said. Is Marta still there? Still running the household with what I understand is an iron fist? She knew, Clara said. She knew I was worried about Leo. She didn't know I was planning to leave, but she knew I was worried. I never said goodbye to her. She was in the conference room last night, Daniel said, when I was asking about you. She told me you were normal that week. Quiet, same as always. He paused. She also said you seemed like a woman who was exactly where she wanted to be. Clara closed her eyes for a second. She meant it as a compliment, Daniel said. I know. Clara opened her eyes. It was both things at once, the way things usually are. From the living room came the sound of movement, the particular shuffle and resettle of a child adjusting position in sleep, the soft sound of Captain the Penguin being relocated to a more optimal position, and then quiet again. They both listened to it without speaking. It was a small sound, in a small house, in a small town, and it carried more weight than either of them had words for. Daniel's phone vibrated on the table. He looked at it. Marcus with an update on the transit situation. He silenced the notification and put the phone face down. Clara raised an eyebrow. It can wait, he said. She looked at the face-down phone and then at him. That might be the first time I've ever seen you put a phone face down. I'm working on it. Leo mentioned that. What did he say? He said you used to look at your phone a lot. He noticed when you stopped checking it today. She paused. He didn't say it like a complaint. He said it the way he says something surprising happened. Daniel looked at the table. He notices everything, he said. He gets that from his mother, Clara said. Isabella used to say that Leo came into the world already paying attention. She glanced toward the living room. She was right. He was paying attention to all of us from the beginning, including me. Especially you. He was quiet. She said, He has your patience. Not the surface patience, the underneath kind. The way you waited for me this morning instead of knocking harder. The way you sat with Vincent instead of coming at him immediately. Leo does that. He waits. He stores up observations, and then he says one thing very clearly that turns out to be everything. What did he say to you when you were running? Daniel asked. In the first months. She looked at the table. He asked every day when he was going to see you. And then one morning he was about 5 months in. He woke up and he didn't ask. And I said, Do you miss Daddy today? And he said, She stopped. What did he say? He said, I think Daddy misses me more than I miss him, because I have you and he has nobody. The kitchen was completely quiet. Daniel looked at the face-down phone. He looked at the snowflake against the napkin holder. He looked at the folder with Isabella's letter, and the folder with Vincent's documentation, and the legal instrument that his dead wife had signed 8 months before she died, because she knew somehow that the world she was leaving was more complicated than the one she had arrived in, and the people she loved were going to need every available tool to find their way through it. He said very quietly, he was right. Clara did not say anything. He was exactly right, Daniel said. He had you and I had... He stopped. He turned the coffee mug in a slow circle on the table. I had everything. Buildings and accounts and structures and people who were afraid of me. And not one thing that mattered the way that child matters. You have him now, Clara said. I know. He looked up. That's what I'm trying to understand how to deserve. She looked at him for a long moment. The afternoon light had shifted, moving toward the particular gold of a winter late afternoon in December, and it came through the kitchen window and landed across the table between them, and on the manila folder, and on Isabella's letter, and on the legal document that was still folded in Clara's hand. She set the document on the table. She pushed it to the center, not toward him, just to the center where it sat between them, neither his nor hers. We figure it out together, she said. He looked at the document in the center of the table. Then he looked at her. Together, he said, not a question this time. From the living room, Leo's voice came through the quiet, still half asleep, riding the particular edge between dreaming and waking. Mama, how many snowflakes? 14 more, Clara called back. A pause. Then, Daddy, are you still here? Daniel looked at Clara for 1 second. Then he stood up and walked to the doorway of the living room and said with the directness of someone learning to say simple things simply, Yeah, bud, I'm still here. A longer pause. Good, Leo said. And then the sound of a child settling back into sleep, safe in the knowledge of something he had been counting on and had now confirmed. Daniel stood in the doorway, listening to his son breathe. Clara sat at the table with the legal document between where he had been sitting and where she was sitting, and looked at the afternoon light coming through the window, and thought about Isabella signing that document with trembling hands. 8 months before she died, thinking about all of them, all 3 of them at once, trying to build them a way through a world she was not going to be in. She thought she had never loved anyone more. She thought she was finally ready to stop running. She thought that what came next was going to be hard and imperfect, and not at all what anyone planned, which was the same thing that could be said about every worthwhile thing she had ever been part of. She picked up the legal document. She folded it again the right way along the original creases. She put it in her coat pocket, and then she got up and put the kettle on because it was Christmas Eve, and there were 14 more snowflakes to make, and a child who was about to wake up from his nap with the full force of the holiday coming down on him like a wave. And the man standing in the doorway to the living room was going to need something warm to hold while he learned what it felt like to be in both places at the same time. Leo woke up from his nap with the particular urgency of a child who has remembered mid-sleep that something important is happening. He sat up on the couch and looked at Captain the Penguin, who had been repositioned at some point during the nap, to face the room with an air of official vigilance, and he said, We slept too long, with the gravity of someone reporting a logistical failure. Then he looked toward the kitchen, where the sound of the kettle and 2 adult voices told him everything he needed to know about the current state of the world, and his expression shifted from concern to something much more settled. Both voices. Still there. Both of them. He picked up Captain and the half-finished snowflake from the coffee table and walked into the kitchen with the focused energy of someone resuming a project that had been temporarily interrupted by biology. I need scissors, he announced. Daniel was sitting at the table with a mug of tea Clara had made him, and he turned to look at Leo with the expression that had been doing something different every time Clara glanced at it, opening a little more each time, like a window being raised inch by inch in a house that had been closed up for too long. He pushed the scissors across the table toward Leo without being asked. Leo sat down, assessed the half-finished snowflake, and picked up where he had left off. You were talking, he said, not looking up from his cutting. Yes, Clara said. About important things. Yes. Okay. He made a careful cut. You can keep talking. I'll work. Daniel looked at Clara over the top of Leo's head. Something passed between them that was not quite amusement and not quite tenderness, but lived in the space where the 2 things overlapped, the shared recognition of a child who had decided that the adults in his life were handling things adequately and had therefore returned to the business of paper snowflakes. How's Captain holding up? Daniel asked. Leo looked at the penguin seated on the table beside him. He's fine. He slept too, but he didn't miss anything because penguins don't need to be awake for conversations. They communicate differently. He made another cut. They make sounds, but they also recognize each other by patterns, like fingerprints but sound. That's true, Daniel said. Leo looked up at him sharply. You knew that. I've been getting educated this morning. Leo considered him. Good. There's a lot more. He returned to the snowflake. We can do penguins after the snowflakes, but snowflakes first because we need 14 more and the day is going fast. Then let's not waste time, Daniel said, and reached for a sheet of paper. Leo looked at his father's hands reaching for the paper and folding it not perfectly, because Daniel Moretti had not had occasion to fold paper into snowflake quarters before this afternoon, and Leo set down his own project immediately, because a student in front of him needed instruction, and Leo understood his priorities. Not like that, he said. Here, like this, like... He leaned across and adjusted the fold with the patient precision of someone who has been taught carefully and intends to teach carefully in return. And Daniel held still and let his son's small hands correct the angle of the paper, and Clara turned to the counter, so neither of them would see her face do what it was doing. She gripped the edge of the counter and breathed through it. 19 months of running. 19 months of waking up at 3 in the morning and lying still in the dark, cataloging every decision she'd made, and every risk she was carrying, and every possible way the whole thing could come apart. 19 months of telling a small boy that his daddy loved him, and was working very hard, and would see him again, and not knowing on the harder nights if that was a promise or a story, she was telling them both to make it through until morning. And now Daniel Moretti was sitting at her kitchen table on Christmas Eve, letting his 4-year-old son correct his paper folding technique, and the kettle had gone quiet, and outside the snow was coming down at the particular gentle pace that it takes on in the late afternoon when it has decided to commit to the evening. She was done running. The knowledge of it settled into her body like something physical, not a decision made in a moment, but a recognition of something that had already happened, that had been happening since she opened the door this morning and found him standing there with his hands out of his pockets and a dead woman's letter in his jacket. She turned back to the table and sat down and picked up a piece of paper and started folding. You too, Leo said. Me too. We need 14. 13 now, Leo said, nodding at Daniel's paper. He's making one. He's making one, Clara agreed. Daniel looked up from his paper with the expression of a man who has found himself in a situation so far outside his operational experience that his usual frameworks are completely useless, and who has discovered to his own surprise that this does not bother him the way he would have expected. Tell me about the cutting, he said to Leo. Leo put down his own scissors and gave his father his full attention. Okay, he said. First you have to decide what kind of snowflake. There's the simple kind and the complicated kind. The complicated kind is harder, but it looks better when you open it. What kind are you making? Complicated. I've been practicing. Then show me complicated, Daniel said. Leo picked up his scissors with the air of someone accepting a commission. Marcus called at 4:15. Daniel stepped into the hallway to take it, and Clara heard the quality of his voice shift from the tone it had been holding all afternoon. Quieter, more present, stripped of the formal authority that was his default, back toward the efficient precision of the man who ran an organization. Not entirely. Not back to what it had been this morning in the conference room with 14 people in the hallway. But the shift was there, and Clara listened to it, and did not find it frightening the way she might have found it frightening yesterday. She found it true. He was both things. He had always been both things. The question was not whether Daniel Moretti could stop being the man who built empires and made decisions that reshaped significant portions of the world around him. The question was whether the man who built empires could also make room inside the same life for the things that empires could not build. Leo was counting completed snowflakes. He had lined them up on the far end of the table and was conducting a census with the focused methodology of someone running an inventory. 7, he reported to Captain. 7 done, 7 to go. 6, Clara said. Your father is finishing one in the hallway. Leo looked toward the hallway and then at the snowflake in question which Daniel had set down when the phone rang. He picked it up and examined it with the critical eye of quality control. "It needs one more cut," he said. "He'll do it when he comes back." "Okay." Leo set it back down with care. "He's learning fast," he added the way a teacher might note a promising student. "He is," Clara said. "You're surprised," Leo said, looking at her. "A little." "I'm not." He picked up his scissors again. "He's smart. You can tell when someone's smart because they stop when you correct them instead of arguing." He made a cut. He stopped and fixed it, twice. Clara looked at her son. "When did you get so perceptive?" "I've always been perceptive," Leo said. "You said so." She had in fact said so, approximately 100 times in varying contexts. It was the kind of statement that Clara had made without understanding that Leo was filing it alongside everything else he filed, building a self-understanding out of the things the person he trusted most said about him when she wasn't thinking about the fact that he was listening. Children built themselves out of the words that fell around them. She had known that. She had not always known how completely she meant it. Daniel came back into the kitchen. He picked up the snowflake Leo had indicated needed one more cut, looked at it, found the place Leo had been referring to, and made the cut. He held it up. "That spot," Leo said, pointing. "The left side." "The left side from where you're holding it." Daniel rotated the paper, made the cut, held it up again. Leo studied it and nodded once. "Good. Now open it carefully." Daniel unfolded the paper with the same deliberate care he had applied to Isabella's letter that morning, and the snowflake came open imperfect, slightly asymmetrical, with one branch longer than the others, because the first fold had been off by a few degrees, but unmistakably itself and unmistakably made by the hands currently holding it. He set it on the table. Leo slid it into the lineup without ceremony. 8, he said. Daniel sat back down and reached for another sheet of paper, and Clara watched him do it. Watch Daniel Moretti reach without hesitation. For a second sheet of paper, to make a second snowflake on Christmas Eve, in a small rented house where nobody knew his real name, and she thought, this is what it looks like. Not transformation as a headline. Not change as a dramatic declaration. Just a man reaching for another sheet of paper because his son is counting and he is part of the count. Chapoy. Marcus's call had contained 3 things which Daniel processed in the kitchen while Leo was not listening and Clara was not pretending she wasn't listening. The first was that Vincent's documentation was already 40 pages and growing, and what it contained was going to require months of careful untangling, but nothing in it so far suggested anything that couldn't be addressed from the inside without external exposure. The second was that Soto had been reached and was in transit to the Moretti estate. Marcus had told him only that Daniel needed to see him regarding a sensitive matter and that it was important. Soto had said, "I'll be there in 40 minutes, which was what loyalty that had never been anything but genuine sounded like when it was called upon. The third thing Marcus said was the thing Daniel was still turning over when he sat back down at the kitchen table. "The system found something in the parallel files that we almost missed," Marcus had said with the careful tone he used for things that were significant and did not have a clean category. Among the personnel files Vincent maintained separately, there are records of 6 people that he was tracking independently of our standard HR structure. 3 of them are people still inside the organization. 2 of them left in the last 18 months. And one of them, he had paused. "Tell me, Marcus, one of them is Clara." Daniel had stood in the hallway and waited. "He had a full file on her," Marcus said. "Not the background file from when she was hired. Something he built himself separately. It goes back 5 years before she started working for Isabella. Before she and Isabella ever met." "How did he know her 5 years ago?" "He didn't. He found her." Marcus paused. Sir Clara was not randomly selected by an agency. Vincent identified her specifically. He chose the agency. He influenced the hire. He had been looking for someone with her particular profile nursing background, no close family, genuine attachment to children, strong ethics for over a year before Isabella got sick. Daniel had looked at the kitchen doorway where Clara was visible at the table, helping Leo hold a piece of paper while he made a cut. "He planted her," Daniel said. "Not exactly. She was genuine. Her background, her skills, her feelings for Leo, all of it is real. He didn't manufacture her character. He just identified someone with exactly the character he needed and arranged for her to be exactly where she would become indispensable. Indispensable and then useful, Daniel said. When the time came, yes. Daniel had ended the call and stood in the hallway for a moment, looking at the woman who had given up 2 years of her life to keep a promise to a dying woman. And he had felt something that was complicated enough that he needed the moment to get clear on what it was before he went back into the kitchen. What he felt was not anger at Clara. Nothing about this changed who she was, or what she had done, or why she had done it. What he felt was the full, clean weight of understanding Vincent Caruso completely at last. Not the surface version, the ambitious lieutenant building a parallel empire. The underneath version. A man who had spent years not just building structures, but cultivating people. Manufacturing circumstances. Identifying the precise human being for each role in a long game and placing them like pieces on a board. Clara had been a piece on Vincent's board. She had not known it, and what she had built, the reality of who she was to Leo, the promise she had kept, the 2 years she had given, none of that was Vincent's. He had chosen the person, but he had not made her. Everything she had done because of who she already was. That distinction mattered. It mattered in a way that Daniel was still working out the full shape of when he walked back into the kitchen and sat down and reached for the paper. He was going to tell her. He was going to tell her tonight after Leo was asleep. She deserved to know all of it, and she deserved to hear it from him directly, rather than through documentation or Marcus's reports or the slow accumulation of information that would eventually reach her through other channels. He was going to tell her, and he was going to watch her process it, and he was not going to manage her reaction or redirect it or try to move past it faster than she needed to move. He was going to sit with it alongside her the way he had not sat with things alongside people in a very long time. That was the decision he had made in the hallway. It was, he was aware, an unusual decision for him. He was making a lot of unusual decisions today. He found when he checked that he did not want to stop. They made 14 snowflakes. Leo counted them twice and declared the total satisfactory, and then spent 20 minutes directing the hanging of each one, taping them to windows, to the bookshelf, to the lamp in the living room, to the kitchen door frame at exactly his eye level, because he explained snowflakes should be where people could see them, and he was people. Daniel held the tape. Clara handed him snowflakes in the order Leo specified. They moved through the small house as a unit, the three of them following Leo's curatorial vision with the focused cooperation of people who have a job to do and have decided to do it well, and the house filled up with paper snowflakes, uneven and imperfect, and made by 3 sets of hands on an afternoon that none of them had expected to end up inside. When the last one went up on the window beside the front door, low enough for Leo to have taped it himself with Daniel steadying his arm. Leo stepped back and looked at the room and at the window with its uneven Christmas lights outside and its paper snowflake inside, and he made a sound that was not quite a word. It was the sound of someone whose internal accounting has just come out right. "Good," he said. "Very good." Clara agreed. He looked at Daniel. "What do you think?" Daniel looked at the snowflake on the window, the paper one overlapping the light from the porch lights outside, and he said, "I think this is the best decorated room I've been in." Leo accepted this seriously. "We did it together," he said. "That's why it's good." Nobody added anything to that. Yeah. Dinner was tomato soup and grilled cheese sandwiches because that was what Clara had in the house, and Leo's face when he heard the menu contained 0 disappointment and significant enthusiasm, which told Daniel something about the meals they had eaten over the last 19 months that no report or document could have conveyed. They ate in the living room. Leo had insisted on this for reasons he explained at length. Christmas Eve required different furniture arrangements because holidays were about doing things differently from ordinary days, and eating in the living room was different, and therefore it was required. His logic was airtight, and nobody contested it. They sat on the floor around the coffee table with their soup bowls and their sandwiches, and Leo talked about penguins between bites with the particular intensity of someone sharing important information, and Daniel asked questions that were genuine, rather than performative. And Clara watched her son light up with the specific brightness of a child who has been given the thing they wanted most without having known how to ask for it. Not a toy, not a Christmas present. His father's attention. Full present, unoccupied by anything else. Not managed attention with one eye on a phone or a door or a decision waiting to be made in another room. Just his father on the floor of the living room, learning about king penguins. They can hold their breath for 27 minutes, Leo said. 27 minutes, Daniel said. Underwater, while swimming fast. Leo demonstrated with his arms what fast underwater swimming looked like, which resulted in a brief near collision with his soup bowl, which Clara caught with the reflexive competence of someone who has spent 2 years anticipating exactly this kind of thing. Thank you, Daniel said to Clara. He does it every time with the swimming demonstration, she said. I only spilled once, Leo said with dignity. And it was Captain's fault that time. Captain knocked the bowl, Daniel said. Leo looked at Captain, who was propped against the couch behind them. He was repositioning. Daniel looked at the penguin. He looked at his son. He looked at the paper snowflakes covering the windows and the lamp and the door frame, and the low one on the front window that Leo had taped himself, and he sat very still for a moment in the middle of all of it, and simply felt the weight of where he was, not managing it, not assessing it, not calculating its implications, just feeling it. The soup was getting cold, and his son was explaining the diving habits of seabirds, and outside the snow was coming down against the Christmas lights. And this was the thing. This unremarkable, specific, ordinary thing. Soup getting cold, and a child talking too fast, and paper snowflakes made by hands that had never made paper snowflakes before. This was the thing he had spent 4 years building a fortress to protect, and had actually in the building kept himself from ever getting inside. He picked up his spoon. He ate his soup. He listened to his son. After dinner, when Leo was running low on energy, but too committed to the night to admit it, Daniel told him a story. It had not been planned. Leo had climbed into his father's lap on the living room floor, with the unself-conscious confidence of a child who has decided that this is where he belongs right now, and has simply placed himself there, and he had looked up at Daniel and said, "Tell me something." "What do you want to hear?" "Something true," Leo said. "Not from a book, from you." Daniel had looked at the top of his son's head, at the dark hair that was all Moretti, and the small, careful hands that were all Isabella, and he had said, "Okay." And he had told Leo the story of how he met his mother. Not the official version. Not the version he had told people at business dinners, or in the brief formal conversations he had had about Isabella in the 2 years since she died. The real version, the one where he had been standing at a hospital fundraiser that he attended because his presence was expected rather than because he wanted to be there. And Isabella had been there working as a volunteer, and she had come up to him not knowing who he was, and told him that he looked like a man who was very busy pretending not to be bored. And he had laughed, actually laughed unexpectedly in the way you laugh when someone sees you clearly enough to say something that is not a compliment, and is somehow still exactly right. Leo listened with his eyes going wide and then narrowing in concentration, and then going wide again when the story moved. "Did you know right then?" Leo asked. "Know what?" "That she was the one." Daniel looked at Clara across the room. She was sitting on the couch with her knees pulled up and her mug in her hands, and she was looking at him with an expression that was careful and open. At the same time, the way her face had been all day, careful because she had spent 19 months being careful open because something in the day had made it harder and harder to stay entirely closed. "I knew something," Daniel said. "I didn't have the right word for it yet." "Sometimes you know things before you have words," Leo said. "That happens to me. I feel something, and then later I find out what it's called." "That happens to me too," Daniel said. Leo absorbed this as new data about his father and filed it alongside everything else he had filed today. Then he said, "Do you miss her?" "Yes." "Me too." He was quiet for a moment. "I miss who she was to me, but I don't know who she was to you." "She was the person who told me the truth," Daniel said, "even when it was hard. She didn't stop telling me the truth even when I didn't want to hear it." Leo thought about this. Like Mama tells me the truth even when it's hard. Yes, Daniel said. Like that. Leo turned to look at Clara on the couch. Mama's good at truth, he said. I know, Daniel said. You should listen to her more, Leo said with the matter-of-fact directness of someone who is not trying to be impolite but has an observation that seems relevant and sees no reason not to share it. Clara made a sound behind her mug. I'm working on it, Daniel said. Okay. Leo turned back to face forward, apparently satisfied. Tell me more about Mama Isabella. So Daniel talked. He talked about Isabella in a way he had not talked about her since she died. Not the summary version, not the protected version, but the full version, with all the specific details that made a person real rather than remembered. The way she organized her books by the color of their spines because it drove him crazy, and she knew it. The way she sang in the car, not well without caring. The way she had shown him over years that the things he thought made him strong were sometimes the things keeping him small. Leo listened with his full body, the way he listened to everything leaning back against his father's chest and looking at the ceiling of the living room with the paper snowflakes overhead. At some point, his questions slowed, then stopped. His weight shifted in the particular way of a child approaching sleep, not all at once, but in stages, the body taking over before the mind has agreed to let go. Daniel looked down at his son's sleeping face and sat completely still. Clara set down her mug and got up quietly and crossed the room and crouched beside them and looked at Leo for a moment with an expression so unguarded that Daniel felt like he was seeing something private. I'll take him up, she said softly. Let me, Daniel said. She looked at him. Let me put him to bed, he said. She moved back to give him room, and Daniel shifted carefully the particular slow architecture of a parent managing a sleeping child, and lifted Leo with an ease that came not from practice, because he had not had enough practice, and he knew it, but from the particular care of someone who understands that they are holding something irreplaceable. Leo's head went against his father's shoulder without waking. Daniel carried his son upstairs. Clara listened to the footsteps on the stairs, to the quiet of the bedroom above her, to the sound of a child being put into bed by the parent, who had not been there to do it for 19 months, and she stood in the living room with its paper snowflakes and its Christmas lights and its soup bowls still on the coffee table, and she let herself feel all of it. She had been managing her feelings for so long that feeling them fully had a physical quality, like circulation, returning to a limb that had been held still. She sat down on the couch. She thought about Vincent Caruso on the drive back to New York, documenting an empire he had built in the shadow of someone else's life. She thought about Soto arriving at the Moretti estate, loyal and unknowing, about to have a conversation about his own voice being used as a weapon. She thought about Marta, in the household she had run for 9 years, going about the business of Christmas Eve without knowing that 48 hours from now, the world she managed was going to look different. She thought about Isabella 8 months from the end of her life, sitting across a desk from a lawyer in Connecticut and explaining what she needed built and why. She thought about what it meant to love someone well enough to plan for your own absence. She was still sitting with that when Daniel came back downstairs. He sat down on the couch, not across the room, beside her with the directness of someone who has decided that this particular distance is the right one. He went out before I finished pulling the blanket up, he said. He always does. Once he decides to sleep, he goes fast. He smells like those sandwiches. He always smells like whatever we last ate. I've stopped trying to understand why. Daniel was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I need to tell you something. His tone was the careful one, not managed, but careful the way a person sounds when they are about to say something that matters and want to say it right. Clara turned to look at him. He told her about Marcus's call. All of it. Vincent identifying her 5 years ago, the file he had built before she ever entered the Moretti household, the deliberate placement of someone with exactly her character into exactly the position where she would become indispensable, and then when the time came available. He told her steadily and without softening it because she had asked for truth, and he had said he was working on giving it, and this was the first real test of that. Clara listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for long enough that he began to understand that the quiet was not the absence of a response, but the presence of a very large one, being sorted. "He chose me because I would love Leo," she said finally. "Yes, he knew I would love Leo because of who I already was. He needed someone who would love Leo genuinely, not someone who would perform it. Because a performed version wouldn't have held. Leo would have seen through it." She was working it through out loud, turning it in the light, looking at the angles of it. He needed the real thing. Yes. So he found the real thing, and used it. She said it without drama. He used my actual love for Leo as a mechanism. Yes. She looked at the snowflakes on the window. But the love was real. It was completely real. He couldn't manufacture that part. He could only find it and aim it. "He thought he was using you," Daniel said. "But what he actually did was put the right person in the right place and underestimate what she'd do when she got there." Clara looked at him. "He expected you to run when things got hard and come back when he called," Daniel said. "You ran when you thought Leo needed you to run, and you stopped when you thought Leo needed you to stop. He couldn't control that because he didn't understand it. He thought your love for Leo was a lever he could operate. He didn't understand that it was the one thing in the situation that wasn't his to operate." Clara absorbed this. She said, "Does it bother you that he chose me? That none of it started?" "No," Daniel said. He said it without hesitation, which surprised them both slightly. "It doesn't, because I'm sitting in this room right now, and my son is upstairs asleep, and there are 20 paper snowflakes on the windows, and this afternoon you told me we figure it out together." He paused. "Vincent can have credit for putting you in that house. He doesn't get credit for who you were when you were in it." Clara looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "I was scared of you this morning." "I know. I had a bag packed. Marcus told me. I had a route planned, out the back, to a car I keep 2 streets over." She held his gaze. "I was 30 seconds from grabbing Leo and running when I looked through the peephole." "What stopped you?" She thought about it honestly, which was the only way she knew how to think about things. "You weren't holding the door. You weren't trying to get in. You were just standing there." She paused. "A man who is going to take something doesn't stand at the door waiting to be let in." "I almost knocked harder," he said. "I know. I could see it in how you were standing. But I didn't." "But you didn't." They sat with that for a moment. Outside, the snow had committed fully to the evening, and the Christmas lights on the porch railing caught it as it fell, giving the light a quality that was specific to this kind of night. Not dramatic, not cinematic, just the particular piece of a December evening that has decided to be exactly what December evenings are supposed to be. Daniel said, "I want to talk about what comes next. Not tonight. I know tonight is not the night for that conversation." He looked at her. "But I want you to know it's a conversation I want to have. Not a decision I've already made. A conversation. About Leo. About all of it. About Leo and about you, and about what this family looks like going forward." He paused on the word and did not back away from it. Family. Not the legal structure. Not the arrangement. The actual thing. Clara was quiet. "I know that word is complicated right now," he said. "It's not complicated," she said. "It's large. There's a difference." He looked at her. "Complicated means hard to understand," she said. "I understand it. I understand exactly what you mean when you say it. And I understand exactly what it costs you to say it, because you have not used that word to mean something living in a very long time." She looked at the snowflakes. "Large means I need to stand in it for a minute before I know where all the edges are." "Take the time you need." "I will, Clara." He said her name the way he had said it on the porch this morning, just the name with the full weight of the day behind it. "I'm not going anywhere tonight." She looked at him. "I'll sleep on the couch," he said. Leo's going to wake up tomorrow, and it's going to be Christmas morning, and I want to be here when he does." He held her gaze. "Is that all right?" She thought about Leo at Mrs. Henley's table saying, "I think Daddy misses me more than I miss him. Because I have you, and he has nobody." She thought about the snowflake Daniel had held up to the light, while Leo watched him from across the table with the expression of a teacher with a promising student. She thought about 32 steps and a clay ornament and a dead woman's letter, and the legal document folded in her coat pocket, and every single piece of a story that had started long before this morning and was not over yet, was nowhere near over, was in fact just arriving at the part where the real work began, the unglamorous daily work of people choosing each other in ordinary moments, because the ordinary moments were where the actual choosing happened. "Yes," she said. "That's all right." He nodded once. Then he reached across and picked up the soup bowl from the coffee table and stood up and carried it to the kitchen because it needed to go there. And he was up, and it was a simple thing. And Clara sat on the couch and listened to the sound of him moving in her kitchen and felt the edges of the word large beginning slowly to define themselves. In the morning, it was Leo who woke first. This was not surprising. He came downstairs at 6:47 in the morning with Captain the Penguin and his bear ear hood coat already on over his pajamas, because he intended to go outside and check whether the snow had settled properly. And he stopped at the bottom of the stairs and looked at his father asleep on the couch. He stood there for a moment. He looked at his father. He looked at the paper snowflake on the window with the Christmas light coming through it. He looked at Captain. Then he went quietly to the kitchen and got a glass of water, because he was thirsty, and also because he had decided, in the particular way he decided things, that this was not a situation that required any action from him. His father was there. He was still there. That was the thing he had been counting, and the count had come out right. He went to the window and looked out at the snow and said to Captain in a quiet voice so as not to wake anyone, "Merry Christmas." Captain said nothing because Captain was a stuffed penguin. But Leo nodded anyway, as if something had been confirmed. Upstairs, Clara woke to the particular quality of silence that a house holds on Christmas morning. Not empty silence, but full silence. The silence of something waiting to begin. She lay still for a moment and listened, and heard very faintly the sound of Leo's voice downstairs talking to his penguin. And underneath it, the quieter sound of someone else breathing in the living room. She closed her eyes and opened them again, and felt the day settle into her like something that had been a long time coming. She got up. She went downstairs. Leo was at the window. Daniel was awake on the couch, sitting up already, watching Leo with the expression that Clara was learning to read, the open one, the one that didn't guard itself, the one that was still surprising on his face, and that she suspected would be for a long time yet, because that kind of opening was slow and real, and couldn't be rushed. "Merry Christmas," Clara said. Leo spun around. "Mama, the snow is deep. Can we go outside?" "After breakfast." "Daddy's awake," Leo reported, gesturing at Daniel as though this required documentation. "I can see that." "He was here all night," Leo said. He said it with the even satisfaction of a completed calculation. "I checked." Daniel looked at Clara. Clara looked at Daniel. "He checked," she said. "I heard," he said. Leo was already pulling on his boots because the question of going outside after breakfast was in his assessment essentially settled, and preparation was the logical next step. "Captain needs to see the snow," Leo explained. "He's never seen real snow. Only pictures." "We'll take him out," Daniel said. Leo stopped pulling on his boot and looked at his father. "You'll come outside?" "Yes." Leo considered whether this required any additional response, and apparently decided it did not, because he returned to his boot with renewed purpose. Daniel looked at the paper snowflake on the window, the one Leo had taped himself, the one that was still there from yesterday, slightly translucent now, with the morning light coming through it. He thought about the clay ornament still in his jacket pocket. He would hang it somewhere today. He would ask Leo where it should go, and Leo would have an opinion because Leo had opinions about where everything belonged. He thought about Isabella, not with the grief that had been running underneath everything for 2 years. The grief that had made him build walls and tighten schedules and measure 32 steps and turn love into security protocols. He thought about her the way you think about someone when you have finally, after a long time, moved from the part of losing them that is only pain to the part where the pain has company. He thought she would have been good at this morning. He thought she was good at this morning. She just did it in a different way. She did it by making sure the people who came after her had what they needed. She did it by writing a letter, by signing a document, by trusting the right person and telling that person the truth about the man they were both trying to love into something better. By giving her son from the last months of her life the gift of a woman who would not stop until she had made sure he grew up knowing that his joy was not inconvenient. That was Isabella. She had been doing it all along. Daniel stood up from the couch and stretched and went to the kitchen and started to figure out where the coffee was because Clara had made tea yesterday and he had accepted it gratefully and said nothing about it, but this morning was Christmas morning and there were things a man needed. "Second cabinet," Clara said from the doorway. He opened the second cabinet. "Thank you." "There's a red bag. It's good." He found the red bag. He looked at it. He looked at Clara in the doorway. He said, "Thank you. Not for the coffee." She understood. She crossed the kitchen and took the bag from him and said, "I'll make it. You don't know where anything is yet." Yet. The word was small, and it was exactly right. Leo appeared in the kitchen doorway with both boots on, and his coat zipped, and Captain held out toward them both with the bearing of someone presenting an official delegate. "Captain is ready," he announced. "For the record." "Noted," Daniel said. "Breakfast first," Clara said. Leo looked at the ceiling, briefly registering his position on this policy without arguing with it, and then looked back at his father. "After breakfast, we go outside." "After breakfast, we go outside," Daniel confirmed. Leo put Captain down on the kitchen table and climbed into a chair and looked between them with the steady, organized attention of a child who has spent the morning conducting an inventory and arrived at a satisfactory total. "Good," he said. "Everyone's here." And that was the truth of it, simple and entire, and not requiring anything added to it. Everyone was here. The woman who had loved a child enough to run and had loved him enough to stop. The man who had built a fortress around everything he feared losing and had finally understood that the thing he feared losing most was the thing the fortress was keeping out. The boy who had spent 2 years counting arrivals and absences and had woken up on Christmas morning to find the count complete. They were imperfect and unfinished, and had a long road of complicated, ordinary days ahead of them. There were conversations still to have, and structures still to dismantle, and trust still to build in the slow way that real trust gets built, which is not through declarations, but through the daily accumulation of a person doing what they said they would do. But this morning, in a small kitchen, in a town that didn't know their names with 20 paper snowflakes on the windows and a stuffed penguin on the table, and the smell of coffee beginning to fill the air. This morning they were all exactly where they were supposed to be. Some families are built by blood. Some are built by law. Some are built through grief and promise, and the particular stubbornness of a woman who decides that a child's happiness is worth everything she has. The best ones. The ones that hold are built by people who choose each other in small moments again and again until the choosing becomes the most natural thing in the world. Daniel Moretti had spent 4 years building walls. He had driven 3 hours in the dark to find out what was on the other side of them. What was on the other side was this. A kitchen, a boy, a woman who told the truth, and the understanding arriving quietly and completely on Christmas morning that he had not lost his family the night Clara disappeared. He had been walking toward it the whole time,